so much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay, if there's
Yes.
any audio problems, please let me know.
All good, Catherine.
Okay, wonderful. Um, so like Dalia said, hello everyone, my name is Katherine Gatchell and I'm the director of the Office of Disability Resources at Carnegie Mellon, which is a university in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the United States. I was asked to do this presentation both as someone who works directly with students with disabilities with a variety of accessibility challenges, but also as an end user myself, being totally blind and using a screen reader to access the computer and a number of other pieces of assistive technology. And the topic that we have chosen is, I'm going to be talking about a couple of sort of key accessibility problems in the world of individuals who are blind or visually impaired, but that's more going to be towards the end of the conversation. The bulk of the presentation is going to be about how to identify accessibility challenges that do exist in the real world and some practical solutions and how to really involve individuals with disabilities in those conversations. I had asked Larissa and Dalia to please encourage everyone to put questions in the chat, and I'll stop periodically to make sure that we get all of those questions answered. So let's dive in though. So you have a brilliant idea. Now what? So is it, is it out there already? How do you know? Let's Google it. Let's do a little Google search and see. Maybe there's some peer-reviewed journals, papers, PhD theses, and I mentioned PhD dissertations as well because sometimes things don't necessarily get out there into the real world of publishing. They were a brilliant idea. Someone wrote their PhD thesis about them, and maybe they didn't get published for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons might have been that the product didn't work. And hopefully it did, but if it didn't, you definitely want to know why it didn't. And so that's why I put PhD theses out there in the kind of things to search for. When you first have an idea that you think is going to, I'm going to be a little bit facetious here, but solve all the world's accessibility problems for a particular population, there's a lot of question about, well, how do I know if it's already out there? It's not like an iPhone that everyone, has one, so we know that that exists. So there are lots of these tools. Another tool besides the Google search, besides the peer-reviewed papers, besides the PhD dissertations, is finding out what professional organizations exist out there in that field. Are there people in those professional organizations you could contact to learn about how has this problem been solved already? Is it still in the process of being solved? And then, of course, and what most of this presentation is about, is interviewing individuals with disabilities themselves. And you want to interview people with as diverse backgrounds as you possibly can. So different stages of life. Are they a student? Are they a are they a working professional? Are they retired? Is it a child? All of those, in your target group, unless you have a very focused product that's only for children from ages 4 to 10 with cerebral palsy, you really want to focus on a broad age group, a diverse set of kind of educational, socioeconomic backgrounds. A lot of times what we see in academia is college students are a very easy bunch of folks to tap in large groups. And so there tend to be a lot of research studies done using college students, and that's great, but that doesn't necessarily represent a very diverse spectrum of the population. So the extra work is really worth it. It does take a lot of time when you're looking at developing tools for individuals with, not just individuals with disabilities, but any type of human-based tool, but especially individuals with disabilities, because you're going to be taking some time to do that recruitment and do that interview. So that's really going to take some time, and it is well worth it to make sure that what you're working on is meeting the needs in the right ways. What sometimes happens is that people find that the product, the brilliant idea that they have, it or some version of it is already out there. So if that's the case, are people using it? And if not, why not? So there might be a lot of possible reasons. It might already be working out there. It might be used and it works great. And sometimes what you see is with an individual or people with disabilities in certain populations, it's such a small population that it's not really well known out there in the broader world. Let's say, what are all of the pieces of technology that help individuals who are totally blind read books? That's a very niche kind of product. It definitely exists, but I'm going to guess that most of you out there might not be able to identify, a couple of products that meet that need. So if you had an idea, I want to help individuals who are blind read books in a portable way. How do we do that? Well, good news is that problem has largely been solved, but maybe it hasn't been solved. Maybe the existing, how do the existing products work? What problems are they solving or not solving? Who are the manufacturers? What are the products kind of market shares? Get all of these pieces of information. What are the advantages and disadvantages of competing products? Giving an example here. The JAWS screen reader, which stands for Job Access with Speech. So this is a piece of software that reads what's on the screen for an individual who needs either voice output or a braille display or both. JAWS is a great product. That's the one that I use. There's also another one out there called NVDA, Non-Visual Desktop Access. It happens to be free, whereas JAWS is not. And so NVDA is taking an increasing share of the market because, well, it's free. I would still argue that JAWS offers a little bit better experience, but hey, you can't argue with free. And then VoiceOver being the solution for mobile technology, specifically for iPhone. So these are kind of the main, and actually there's a VoiceOver for Mac for desktop and laptop use as well. So these are the main screen readers. So learning about, let's say you were going to think about developing another screen reader. Well, let me learn about the market share for these particular ones that exist. What if it's out there and it's not widely used, maybe even not widely used by the population in question? What we see a lot, because I work a lot with researchers at Carnegie Mellon that has a large artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer science, very, very robust programs in those areas. So what we see a lot is that that product might work very well in the lab in very controlled conditions and not so well in the real world. Maybe when it comes to actually setting up the product, it takes 10 minutes to set it up every time you want to use it. So yes, that's set up in the lab, but not so great in the real world. Maybe it really requires very high level of technical skills to operate. And this is so key because all of you guys that are very, very tech savvy and very sharp in that area, for you, that's not a difficult thing. It's easy to use because that's kind of how your brain works. But for most of us who may have various levels of tech comfort, if something takes even a little bit of technical skill to use, that can be a barrier. And that's certainly true. I'm not just talking about for individuals with disabilities, but really any type of average end user that's looking at using a product. Maybe it works for a narrow range of people with a very specific disability. It works very well for people who use wheelchairs, but have full upper body strength and maybe a little bit of, their ability to move their, up right up until their lower body starts. That turns out to be a much more limited group of people, and we'll see how that applies later than just say wheelchair users. Maybe it goes only part way towards solving the problem. It makes some things better, but maybe the real issue is still not quite solved, and so that's gonna pose some barriers to adoption. It tries to solve a problem that isn't really a problem, and we'll see that in a later slide. It could be that low tech solutions work just as well or better and maybe have even been developed. Maybe it's a really high cost. These are all things that we're going to see later where, yes, it works. It could potentially be great for a certain population, but it costs $30,000, which is a lot of money. Maybe it's a brilliant product that doesn't have any of these above issues, but marketing just really hasn't done what it needs to do to get the product out there. And this is where we'll talk about the importance later. We'll talk about kind of joining existing groups rather than trying to kind of make it on your own and push a product on your own. I want to stop now and see if there are any questions in the chat. And drink some water.
So right now we don't have any question, Catherine. I assume everyone is trying to find one.
All right, no worries. So wanted to jump into a few of these products that illustrate some of the problems challenges that I talked about in the previous slide. This first one is a device called a Sunu band. It's a wristband that gives, really, it's supposed to give kind of enhanced environmental information for an individual who's blind. So you wear it along with your white cane or along with your guide dog, and you're traveling around out there in the world, and it's supposed to give these vibration patterns that are supposed to indicate if there are other obstacles in your environment that may be, say, farther away than your cane might detect or might be above your head, which your cane would not detect because the cane is not going above your head, hopefully, when you're using your white cane to travel around. Sounds like a really interesting product. And there are a few individuals who use it. But I say a few individuals for a few reasons. One, it's solving a problem that I'm not sure is really a problem. It's not supposed to substitute for a cane. It's not supposed to substitute for a white cane. So it's not something you would wear and be able to leave your white cane at home. I think the people who marketed Sunu Band maybe originally envisioned that, but realized that there are way too many safety concerns, that vibration patterns simply don't give you enough information to substitute for a white cane. They might give you some additional information that's handy from time to time, like if there is the occasional obstacle above your head that the cane or the guide dog would not catch. Or it might give you a little bit more information about things around you. But there's a skill that many blind people have, which is called echolocation. And what that does is it allows us to use our ears to hear the way that sounds kind of bounce around in our environment. And many of us who have been experiencing blindness for a long time and are experienced travelers, we can actually hear, based on how sounds are bouncing around in the environment, we can hear, let's say, an opening to our left or our right, or the change in, let's say it goes from maybe a bush on our right to a wall on our right. You know, we can hear those kinds of things. So the Sunu Band is sort of to do that similar kind of thing. But if we're all able to do it, or most of us are able to do it without the Sunu Band, is it really that necessary? So that shows a couple of these issues of, you know, is it really solving a problem that's out there, or is it solving it enough? Well, it's not solving it enough to replace the white cane, and it's doing some things that some of us are naturally able to do anyway. So I don't necessarily anticipate that this device is going to ever get necessarily widespread adoption. There are a few people who use it for sure and really enjoy it. I'm going to talk about a similar product now. This is a product called WeWalk it's actually a cane all in itself. And it's supposed to do very similar things to what the Sunu Band does, except it connects with an app on your phone, and it's supposed to give you more kind of real-time directions if you want them, or more information. The funny thing is that between the regular white cane and a lot of the GPS navigation apps that exist for individuals who are blind or visually impaired. We kind of have these tools already. So again, I'm not sure the WeWalk is solving that. And the WeWalk being a cane itself, unfortunately, it's a lot heavier than your average white cane, and it only comes in a couple of different sizes. Meanwhile, most white canes that an individual who's blind would use to navigate in their environment, they come in all sorts of sizes. So if I have to change how long my cane is so that I can use this WeWalk device, I'm not sure I would do that, especially if it's going to be heavier. So again, I think this is a product that we're seeing even less adoption of. But I wanted to highlight it because it's one of those things where, you know, I originally heard about it and the people marketing it were like, this is a brilliant idea. This is going to solve all the navigation challenges for individuals who are blind. Well, not so much. Now I want to talk about a different accessibility challenge, and this is the challenge for individuals who use wheelchairs to climb stairs. Kind of seen as would really be a game changer, because as much as we would like that all of our infrastructure would have ramps and elevators, the real world is not set up that way. And so this wheelchair is actually designed to allow an individual to be able to ascend and descend stairs. Sounds great. And in some ways it really is great. It's very, very, very expensive. And more even than a barrier than that, it requires a lot of upper body strength to be able to use this device safely. So imagine someone who's paralyzed from, let's say, the shoulders down or the elbows down, doesn't really have that upper body strength to be able to use this device safely going up and down steps. They need someone to assist them in doing that. And that's a major barrier. It's a great idea, and I hope that there continue to be projects and work in this area, but we aren't, even though the iBot's probably been around in some form or another close to 15, 20 years. But we don't see that everyone who uses a wheelchair out there has an iBot because of this and some other challenges. Now, this is my favorite story, and I'm going to pick on my own university for a moment here. So I got contacted by a researcher who, this was when Google Glass was really in vogue, and they had an idea that they were going to solve the challenge of appliances, how to operate appliances that have visual screens and readouts for individuals who are blind. And the researcher asked me to be a research subject. This was actually before I came to work at CMU. I was still working at another position, but I thought it would be an interesting research project. So the way it worked was you put on a Google Glass and you looked at your, let's say, your microwave, and the program, I guess, would send an image of the microwave to this company that would then like 3D print a label that you would then somehow affix to your microwave, except that the label didn't, work with any kind of dynamic screen, so it couldn't adapt to, like, if you pushed a button and then the screen said something else and then you had to operate a menu. It was more just like a simple labeling solution, except that you would have to, first of all, have a Google Glass, which not too many people had. And you'd have to use this specific program. You'd have to order something, wait for it in the mail. It would come, hopefully it would be correct. It happened that the Braille that was 3D printed by this company was a very uncomfortable. It was very, very hard. And so you would have to press it really, really hard to actuate the button. So your fingers would really hurt. And it turned out, even in the lab, it didn't work all that well. And I said to the researcher, do you know how most blind people solve this problem already? And what we do is, it's a very low-tech solution. There's something called bump dots, which are these adhesive little dots that you can just affix to an appliance like a microwave or a toaster or a washing machine or whatever. And you just have to have a basic kind of simple understanding of how the appliance is laid out. And for the vast majority of appliances in your home, which are something that you would use on a regular basis, this is an almost free and works pretty well solution. So it was an interesting idea, but it was a high-tech solution in a place where low-tech is working well enough that the bar that you would have to kind of overcome to make high-tech work, let's just say, wasn't really worth it. Before I go to the interview, I want to see if there are any questions in the chat, or even if people want to unmute themselves, that's fine too.
So actually, yes, we have a question. Hi, Nijad. So Nijad is asking, is it advisable to start trying special tests that can measure if a product would be adoptable very early on, or it is better to wait until the MVP is created, assuming those tests exist?
Great question. So I wish I could give you a particular test that you could, multiple choice answers or check the boxes to find out if a product was going to work. That does not exist to my knowledge. However, the next few slides are going to be about how to find out before you get too far in the product development phase, find out whether it might be something that's going to work or not. And how far along you are really depends on the type of product, but that's a great segue. But well, let me, before I jump into the next slide, because that is what we're going to talk about the rest of the presentation. Are there any other questions?
Yes, we have 2 more. Go ahead, Ashraf.
Or 3 more.
Can you please share with us your experience regarding digital accessibility, especially when using platforms such as the one we're using today, like online meetings?
Well, I will briefly talk about that. That's a little bit off topic from what we're focusing on, in that, well, it is and it isn't. Digital accessibility just being one part of the user experience for an individual with a disability. I'm not really sure how to start answering that question because it's a really, really broad topic. But just to say that digital accessibility varies widely among products, among platforms. I'm actually new to using Microsoft Teams. We use Zoom at my university, so I'm just not as familiar with it. Seems okay. I've generally heard, out there in the world of folks who are blind or visually impaired, that Teams generally works okay. I did notice there are some buttons that aren't labeled. I'm not sure why. Microsoft ought to know better. Microsoft has a whole large team of accessibility folk. But I think rather than delving deeply into digital accessibility, because that really is its own topic, can I just suffice with that sort of brief type of explanation?
Yes, I think you're right, Katherine. It's really broad, and Ali, we could help you connect with the person, or even if Katherine has time, we could connect with her and maybe ask a specific question so she can answer and help you more later on after the session.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have time today, but I'm happy if you want to share my email address with people. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yes, of course.
We'll do that.
Great.
Katherine, we have one more question. Someone is asking if there's a platform or method that can be used to connect with the target people for an accessibility product to take their feedback about it. Do you know of such a thing? Nope.
There isn't. You got to do it the hard way. Okay, so you have yeah, you got to go out there and network and ask around, find professional organizations. We'll get into all of this in the interview, but there is not a one-stop shop that I know of. All of you can correct me. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of any quote unquote clearinghouse where you can go to readily access a set population of individuals with disabilities.
Okay, so we have Karen who has her hand up. Karen, can you go ahead and unmute?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. I was wondering about the percentage of error and the risk that might be embedded in these products and how companies usually deal with them. For example, in the case of a wheelchair that climbs the stairs.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not an expert in terms of so I want to be clear kind of what my area of expertise is. I'm not a product designer or inventor. I'm not an expert on, you know, patents or safety guidelines specific, but I think that's a major concern. And certainly when you're talking about, okay, I have a product out there and I want it to be approved by, let's say in the US we have the Food and Drug Administration, we have, you know, all of these organizations that sometimes are required if the product is going to be used in a certain area. You know, they have all of these various requirements that you have to meet. And I think it's really going to depend on what the product is. But you're right. I mean, something like that wheelchair, there's a lot of safety issues, and I'm positive that if you purchase an iBot wheelchair, that you have to sign, oh, I don't know, 20 pages of legal documents that say that if you hurt yourself, it's not iBot's fault. I'm confident about that.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so are there any other questions? I think someone is asking about the difference between developed and developing countries. And she says that there are people that are deprived of getting assistive technology because of its cost. And her
Absolutely.
question is, what measures are taken regarding this issue?
That's a great point. And I think the reason that a product like the NVDA screen reader that I mentioned, non-visual desktop access, a lot of the reason that NVDA is seeing such widespread adoption is because it is open source and free. And so for individuals in developing countries, it's a no-brainer. You know, you're going to go with that product that works pretty well, is open source, so people can add to it and enhance it, and is free. There are a lot of devices out there, like things like iBot wheelchairs, that don't fit into that category. And I don't, I would just want to caution everyone that we're talking about difficult challenges here. And so some of the questions that I'm getting are like, what's the solution to this? And I don't know that I have good news of as far as, you know, there is a solution. I think a lot of these issues there isn't a great solution. So when you're thinking about developing a product and you're looking at cost and you're looking at widespread adoption, obviously, if you can find something that is very low cost, has low, a low entry point, I guess, in terms of manufacturing, things like that, that make its ability to be more widespread in the developing world as well.
Yes.
Any other questions?
No, that's it. You can go
Okay.
on, Catherine.
Great.
Thank you.
So we'll
Thank you so
jump
much.
in. Sure, we'll jump into the interview. The interview, I should have made this plural, interviews. This is your key to developing a great product. So let's talk about first, what are the goals of the interview when you're talking to individuals with disabilities? You want to find out what the challenges are in this area, because sometimes people assume that there are particular challenges that exist that don't. I'll give you an example. People all the time, and I'm not sure why, assume that a blind person is going to have difficulty climbing stairs. Not the case unless you're very newly blinded and you haven't mastered that skill. But that's something that, again, if you make that assumption without talking to people first, you run the risk of really trying to create a product for a solution that doesn't, for a problem that doesn't exist. What's the root cause of the challenge? You know, it might not always be the disability itself. Sometimes it's the infrastructure, sometimes it's, you know, socioeconomic issues or other issues. What ideas have been tried before? So when you're doing these interviews, finding out from people, what have you tried in the past? What did work? What didn't work? Why didn't it work? Is the tech solution the best answer? Or are there low-tech solutions like those bump dots that I showed you before? Would that work better? Or maybe there's societal changes that just need to be made. And the people who, I read a lot about the iBot wheelchair, and a lot of the point that was made was, you know, what we really need is not more gadgets. What we really need is more ramps and elevators. That's the societal change that's really going to be most impactful for the widest population of individuals with mobility challenges. And that may come from legislation related to accessibility as well. Sometimes there's perception out there that tech has solved the problem and therefore solutions aren't needed anymore. So I want to just urge a little bit of caution. Sometimes when tech is developed that partially solves a problem, there could be a wider perception in the world that, okay, well, we don't have to make ramps anymore because, you know, there are these stair climbing wheelchairs out there that'll do the job. Well, they don't really fully do the job, but people don't know that. That's tends to be a little bit more nuanced than someone seeing a headline, you know, stair climbing wheelchair. So we want to be careful to make sure that we're continuing to push for these societal changes that are needed, even if we're creating tech solutions. Here's what not to do. If you have an idea or a product, whatever you do, because I've seen this time and again, don't try to convince the interviewees that your product is good or will work, because they want to please you. You know, people want to please. They want to make you happy as the researcher, and so maybe they'll kind of go along with you if that's the message that you're putting out there, but you really don't want to do that. Don't try to fit their needs and goals into your fully envisioned idea. Let their goals and needs shape your idea before you really envision it. Don't assume that the challenges that you perceive are the same ones that they do. I used the example earlier of sometimes people perceiving that climbing stairs is a barrier for individuals who are blind. The vast majority of individuals who are blind that you talk to, that's not going to be high on their list of challenges. It's going to be very low on their list or not make it at all. Don't assume that your goals are the same goals as theirs either. And that means that, you know, something that you think they may want to do, they may or may not want to do. And I've kind of hit on this, but I'm going to hit on again. Don't assume that tech is the only solution. And don't assume that this is sometimes happens. Sometimes people have, they have a disability in common with the people that they're interviewing, and they may fall into the trap of, oh, well, I have that disability too, so I know what my population might need. That's again where I was talking about that importance of a really diverse interview pool, so that you get a wide variety of people with your type of disability, but from a lot of different ages, backgrounds, perspectives, educational levels, ranges of that type of disability from, let's say, totally blind to low vision. You know, so get that diverse population. Who should you interview? I mentioned the wide spectrum within your population. We pretty much covered this, but it's really worth investing the time and effort, and it will be considerable. It's going to be much more time consuming doing this part than it is making and inventing your product. You want to really invest the time in finding the right participants and finding enough of them. And I list here too that whenever possible, do try to pay participants for their time and expertise. There are costs involved in, you know, maybe even getting to the interview, transportation. Even if you come to where they're living or working, they're still giving their time to you. So to get people really to engage and participate, even if you can only pay a small amount, it is important to make sure that your research participants are valued and their time is valued. And a way to do that is to compensate them financially. Maybe it's a gift card, you know, whatever it might be. So when you, excuse me, when you conduct the interview, you're asking open-ended questions. Don't really tell them about your idea right away. Maybe find out a few pieces of information first before you really even get into what your idea is. Hear about their challenges, their needs, their goals, their priorities. Find out, how are they currently solving these challenges? What's working? What isn't? If it's not working, why isn't it? Why didn't previous tech solutions or other solutions work? Why do they prefer high tech versus low tech, or maybe they prefer low tech versus high tech? They prefer societal types of solutions. Be prepared to be surprised. Be prepared to totally reform your idea, scrap it all together, try something new. And I say this because it's so important to really hear those perspectives from people, really hear them and have that inform your idea. Sometimes we do the interview, but we still have our idea in place. And even though we're hearing some things that tell us maybe our idea needs to be changed, we're so excited about our idea that we really want to keep it going, and we want to find a way to make it work. And sometimes based on those interviews, you need to get to a place where you decide to do something else. Should you go it alone, or should you join with an existing group? I would say avoid the temptation to, and I put in quotes here, be a star, meaning there's a lot of temptation that, I've invented this great product, I want to become rich and famous. But unfortunately, what happens is there's so many people, little small groups developing all these interesting ideas, and small groups of people, unfortunately, just don't have a lot of market power, financially, influential, any other kind of way. And so sometimes it works better to find an existing group that's working on that idea already. Maybe they're an existing company, they have a couple of patents, they have some funding, they're well connected, and join in with that group. And maybe that can allow you, rather than reinventing the wheel, maybe you can, this is just a bad analogy, but maybe you can kind of help push the wheel forward, because there is strength in numbers. And so I would encourage you, as you're doing your research and you're finding companies out there that are working on similar things, consider joining that company rather than trying to do something, startup. I'm going to talk a little bit, not too much, about user testing. This is not really my area of expertise, but you're going to be going through many iterations and phases, kind of trial and error. Test really in the user's environment, not just in the lab. And this is important because, in a research type of setting, you are wanting that very controlled environment, same conditions for each different user of the product. But when it comes to actually implementing it beyond the research phase, this is where you really need to go out into their environment where they're going to be using it. So did it solve the problem? Is it effective? Is it efficient? Is it easy to use? Is it affordable? That's a big one. Is it nice looking and enjoyable to use? Sometimes products for individuals who have disabilities, they miss that aesthetic piece, and they miss that, just, this is a great product to use that we enjoy using, because the device is kind of clunky and looks horrible and is really not fun to use. So even if it worked, if it has that experience that's not really a positive one, it's not going to get adopted. Would users buy one if given the opportunity? I mean, that's really the question. If you could buy this, would you do it? So I want to just stop briefly and see if there's any questions before I dive into the two kind of challenges that I want to highlight to illustrate this point.
I guess there's no questions. You can go ahead, and if there are any questions, we can ask them at the end, probably.
Okay, so here are a couple of challenges specifically for individuals who are blind or visually impaired that, in my view, are not yet well solved. One is indoor navigation, and one is access to visualizations of data. So we're going to talk about problem number one, indoor navigation. There are lots of initiatives and ideas, and not too many truly practical solutions yet that solve the problem of how a blind or visually impaired person can come to an unfamiliar indoor environment and independently get around. Outdoor navigation, that, while not a totally solved problem, has been really well accomplished and dealt with in many respects by GPS. So there are many apps out there that a blind person can use, assuming that they have good kind of overall travel skills, to safely and fairly easily get where they need to go in a totally unfamiliar environment. But GPS doesn't really work in indoor spaces. And so while this is solved for outdoor, it's not solved too well for indoor. The other problem with indoor spaces is that they're not widely mapped like outdoor spaces are, you know, with Google Maps and Google Earth and there's another mapping. There's a lot of mapping programs out there that have really done a nice job with outdoor spaces, but indoor spaces don't really map in that same way in the public sphere. So accessing let's say a map of a hospital, you can't just do that on Google. You've got to go to the hospital administrators and say, you know, can I get a map of your facility? And they may not want to give you their floor plan. That might not be information that they just want to put out there. Some solutions do exist, but with a lot of catches. So I'm going to talk about a few of these solutions: Good Maps, Navcog, and Ira. So let's do Navcog first. Navcog is a research project at Carnegie Mellon at my university. It's pretty effective actually when it's implemented. It's expensive and it's really labor intensive. So how does it work? Well, it uses these programmable beacons. They can be battery operated or solar powered. You have to program each beacon, and the user gets dynamic turn-by-turn directions with accuracy of really just a couple of feet. So it's very accurate. The beacons connect with, let's say, an iPhone. I believe it's via Bluetooth. The app that you use to access the solution is very accessible, very easy to use. So that's all great. But what's the problem? Well, it requires careful mapping of each individual indoor space where the Navcog solution is going to be placed. And then the beacons that are put in there, they each have to be programmed. They have to have maintenance, like if they're battery powered, you know, regularly changing them, or they might need to be reprogrammed if things shift a little bit in that indoor space, like, oh, there was a trash can here, but we moved it to the other side now. So we have to move the beacon or change the beacon that talks about where the trash can is to just update that now the trash can's on the left side of the hallway instead of the right. It's so simple, and yet, you know, each of those kinds of things requires that reprogramming. And for, let's say, an average, I don't know, academic building, you're looking at about 400 beacons because they're really placed like every 30 feet. So if you're talking about multiple floors and all that kind of stuff, you're really talking about a lot of beacons. If they're battery powered, I mentioned, you know, that can get expensive too. If they're solar powered, that's great, but there has to be the infrastructure in place to make sure that they get the power they need. So this is a pilot project that's just in place in a few locations, and it's very expensive. It's about, if you want to think about it, it's about $15 per beacon. So for one building, just for the, you know, the cost of the equipment, not to mention the labor, I mean, you're really getting up there in cost. And it requires pretty high level of technical expertise to set up the Navcog system in each individual building. So again, kind of a cool solution for a few places, but if we're talking about something that someone could walk into any hospital, any university, any mall, any airport, that it's really a big lift to get something like that up and running. Another solution is something called Good Maps Explore. This is very new. Its effectiveness, I don't know if it's really widely tested yet, and it may be expensive, but let's talk about how it works. It uses, this is cool, uses LiDAR and image recognition to map indoor spaces. So the good news is you don't have to have beacons, so that helps. It interfaces with an accessible app. It gives those dynamic turn-by-turn directions that I was talking about earlier, and I've heard good reports on its usability and accuracy. So what's the problem? Well, it requires the venues, they have to sign up and they have to pay for the mapping by the Good Maps Explorer team. It does require ongoing work with the Good Maps community to kind of update the mapping. As I was talking about, you know, the example of the trash can earlier, that's a good example. I'm not clear actually at all from the cost. When I go to the website and I try to learn about, like, what if I'm a venue and I want to sign up? How much does it cost? I can't even see that information. So for me, if I were a venue, that would give me a little bit of pause right away. And it's currently only available in a few spaces. I think it has potential, probably more potential than the Navcog, because it doesn't require the beacon piece, but we'll just have to see how well that, you know, becomes adopted out there in the world. The other solution, which is, I would say, of these three, vastly more widely adopted, is the Ira app. Now, this is an app where it's providing on-demand trained sighted assistance. And what happens is the assistant can give directions based on the phone's camera. So you have the Ira, it's an app, you have the app open, your camera is viewing the environment. There's a trained sighted assistant on the other end of the phone, being able to give you that sighted person information, that visual information, based on what the phone camera is seeing. And some venues actually have loaded in their like floor plans, like airports are a good example, some shopping malls, where the assistant can actually compare what they're seeing on your camera to the floor plan that they have access to, so they could give you turn-by-turn directions to, let's say, the bathroom. I have used this. It does work pretty well. I've used it to find the bathroom in an airport, which, let me tell you, that's pretty important. So it is effective. Problem with it, as I see it, and why I don't use it a lot, is because it still requires sighted assistance. It's not fully independent. It's not an app that allows someone to be completely independent in using it, because you still have to have this trained sighted assistant on the other end. And it is a cost. I think you get like free 5 minutes a day or something, and then beyond that you have to pay, which isn't unreasonable from a standpoint of you're paying for someone's time. That's of course important, but it is a barrier for adoption. So if I needed someone to assist me with a lot of things, you know, I'm paying a lot of money every day just to have that assistant. It'd be better if I could just have one thing that I pay, and then I'm done and I can use it independently. So let's move on to problem number 2, and this is, excuse me, visual representations of really graphic, highly visual graphic information, visual representations of data. As I'm sure all of you know, these visual representations, whether they be charts, graphs, tables, are highly common in all kinds of professional fields. So was there a question? I heard someone unmute. Okay.
No question.
Okay. So sciences, you know, computer science, economics, business, education, you name it. I mean, there are all kinds of fields where graphic representation of data is really key. And it's an easy way to represent complex data. That is, of course, unless you can't see it. And so what this can cause for an individual who can't access that visual representation of data is that there's a communication barrier. So they're not able to necessarily fully participate with their sighted colleagues when they're talking about those, let's say, building schematics or the data representing, I don't know, you know, some kind of scientific findings. So how would I access this data? I'll just give you guys a chance to look at this. So this is a problem that some solutions out there, not a lot of robust ones. So there are some Braille and tactile graphics type of solutions. Tactile graphics has come a long way in the last, say, 20 to 30 years, but by its nature, Braille doesn't have the nuances that print would have in representing data, and it also takes a lot more space. There's some audible kinds of things that attempt to represent visual data audibly. I've seen some that AI, I didn't put this on the slide, but some AI-based attempts to describe images. I haven't yet seen any AI-based attempts to describe data itself in any meaningful way. That may be out there, but I haven't seen it. And of course, there's, sighted folks doing the description themselves, maybe writing a text-based description. So there are some, again, partial solutions out there, but there's no solution that I can readily access at my fingertips where I have a graph like the one we saw, or a diagram in the one we saw before, where I could just, let's say, feed that into a system and say, tell me about this data, or let me query this data and get that information that I need based on the visual graphic that's there. So is there a better solution? How could AI help? What about, as I was talking about, descriptions of those graphics, maybe production of tactile graphics, maybe there's some other ideas. I am not a real visionary person, no pun intended, when it comes to, coming up with these creative solutions. This is what you guys are here for. But you want to think about, when you're thinking about a solution to a problem like indoor navigation or visual graphics and non-visual access to those, how could we incorporate individuals who are blind or visually impaired into those solutions, into that solution development? So just a few final thoughts, and then I have left a couple minutes for questions here. I want you to think big, but I want you to be practical and really do your research. Keep asking questions. You're going to be asking questions from the day you dreamed up the idea to the day that it goes out on the market, hopefully goes out on the market. I put this quote here from Thomas Edison that I just completely love. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. And I'm sure this is not a new quote or a new idea for you, but just to reinforce the idea that if you come up with something that doesn't quite work, that learning opportunity that you had along the way is so valuable in informing the next iteration or the next idea. So this is my contact information, and I wanted to see if there are any, in the last 5 minutes or so, any remaining questions.
So guys, if anyone has a question, go ahead and ask. Okay, so Aisha, do you have a question? You can unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, thank you, Larissa. I have a question regarding the lack of data. Some people told me that companies, especially in Lebanon, lack data, and for building AI systems, we need lots of data. So how we can deal with such problem? If you have any kind of a helpful advice or any idea regarding that.
So are you talking about machine, like deep learning type of data?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And it illustrates the fact that, especially for certain populations, what we would call low incidence populations, like individuals who are blind or visually impaired, it's difficult to develop the massive numbers of users that you really need to have to do that deep learning. So I think this is a place, and I will say right up front, I am not an expert on AI or machine learning. I am definitely not that person. But I think we're still at a stage where we need to do a lot of humans teaching AI some things, because there may not be those robust data sets. And I think as we move more and more into being a global economy, and of course we get into things like privacy and data sharing. If I'm a visually impaired user, do I want to share lots of my information about how I do things as a blind person with, all of these tools? Well, I don't know. So I don't know that there's a ready solution that gets into the kind of machine learning part of this. I think it might be something where we're still teaching the AI a lot of our information that we're gathering from our interview process. I know that's not the neat solution that we would like, but I think that's probably the reality. But others may have other experiences. I would be curious if people know other things about that or have different experiences.
Thank you a lot.
Katherine, we have another question. Someone is asking, from your experience, how much can we rely on insurance/government funding in our solutions?
Which country would you like to know about?
Yeah, I'm guessing is yeah. You're only familiar with your country.
Well, what I can say is this: it's going to vary tremendously from country to country.
True.
You know, from a country like Qatar, where you can get your entire education paid for by the government, and you can sometimes get a lot of assistive technology paid for. Oh, but by the way, you have to be Qatari. Did I mention that? Now I know this is not about that particular country, but that illustrates my point that, you know, there are some places where this is going to be readily available for some people. I think it's safe to assume that in most of the world, it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle. Even let's say something like insurance. Let's take insurance in the U.S. as a good example, and we'll
Yes.
use our.
He's asking about the US, actually.
Asking about where?
He's asking about the US.
Okay, so we'll just briefly we'll speculate on the iBot wheelchair. So Medicare, which is a government-funded insurance company for individuals who are elderly and some individuals with disabilities, Medicare is going to look at medical necessity. And it's a really, unfortunately, difficult battle to write a letter that convinces a Medicare insurance provider that someone has a medical necessity for a really fancy wheelchair to climb stairs, because the medical professional is going to, or the insurance company is going to say, well, wait a minute, in the hospital or at the doctor's office, there's an elevator and there's a ramp. So this person doesn't have a medical necessity for a wheelchair that can climb stairs. So it's probably not going to get approved by insurance. So you're looking at someone who has, I don't even know how much the iBot costs, but you know, that really, like, we're talking about the top 1% of the US population, and that's a very, very wealthy group. That's about the only group that could afford a device like that. Unless you got, you know, some kind of, you set up a campaign to fund it, you know, got a lot of your friends to help you, you know, yeah. Are we still connected?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. We're connected.
There we go. And I see that we're running out of time, so I know we want to kind of finish up, but that's the easy answer to that question. It's not easy.
I'm so sorry, Katherine. I think I uploaded my PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if you can see it. I thought
no, that's
it
okay.
I thought it won't appear. I thought it won't appear. I thought it will only upload. I'm so sorry about this. I'm not sure how to take it out.
I'm at time anyway, so it's no problem.
Thank you so much, Katherine. So maybe guys or the teams, if you have any other question, please feel free to ask them. We have one more. So otherwise, Dalia, you can, after this question, you can introduce the next speaker and we can continue the sessions. We have one more question, Katherine, actually. What are the ethical challenges faced by the assistive technology since they are designed to be used by needy individuals?
That's a good question, and I think that highlights what I was talking about earlier when it comes to, let's say, data gathering. Just as one, I mean, there are a lot of ethical considerations, but if we're looking at what data are we collecting, are we exploiting a vulnerable population? If we're talking about, let's say, individuals with intellectual disabilities, do they really understand how their data is being collected, and are they in a place where they can consent to that? I think there are a lot of, and that's really a broad topic, so I don't want to I don't know that I could dive into that and give that adequate answer in 30 seconds, but I think that's a really good point, that when you're talking about development and interviewing and creating products, that thinking about exploitation and understanding the vulnerability of your population and factoring that into how you interact with people is really, really important. So I want to thank everyone so much for your time. This has been absolutely a blast. I really enjoyed meeting all of you, and do please feel free to email me if you have any other questions.
Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you so much for doing this. It was an amazing talk.
Thank you, and everyone, you can mention in the chat what you learned in this session. So if anyone missed anything, they can also learn from you. So maybe Dalia, you can present the next speaker and we can continue.
Of course. So up next, we have with us Dr. Dana Alvaroni. Dr. Dana is a human-centered design lecturer at the Maroon Sam'an Faculty of Engineering and Architecture at AUB. Her research focuses on knowledge creation in university industry collaborative design projects. Dr. Dana will be giving us a presentation on design thinking and human-centered design in particular. So Dr. Dana, you can share your screen and go ahead with your presentation. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, and I'd like to apologize again, Katherine, for interrupting. I thought it will only upload, it won't show on the screen. So sorry again for interrupting. Thank you, Dalia, for the introduction. Let me just make sure. Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Alvaroni, and I'm from
So Dana, you're muted, just so you know. You just muted. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Don't worry.
Again, I'd like to apologize, Katherine, for interrupting your presentation. I thought it would only upload the PowerPoint and it won't show on the screen. I'm so sorry for interrupting. Thank you, Dalia, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm Dana Alvaroni, a lecturer of human-centered design at MSFEA. And I'm here today so we can explore together what is design thinking and how it could support you in this hackathon, but also, of course, afterwards, in exploring the accessibility project or accessibility brief with a focus on your users. I'm also a part of the IDPP team, Interdisciplinary Design Practice Program in MSFEA. The aim of this program is to train and develop students' ability to not only find solutions, but also frame problems in a creative way. And we do that through integrating human-centered design in our courses, but also expand to other departments and faculties. And also our post-baccalaureate fellows work on projects internally to implement the human-centered design, to reimagine experiences and services in a more user-focused way. So, one thing I would like to start with, and I get it a lot from students, is the statement, I am not creative enough, or I don't have creative ideas. And I just want to say one thing, creativity is not a one-time event. A lot of times when we think it's a one-time event where it happens while I'm driving my car, it's probably induced or stimulated by some observation or some readings or some research that we've done. So I'd like to I'd like to tell my students that creativity is a process. It's like a muscle, okay? The more we train it, the more we do certain activities like research and we think critically about designs and products around us or daily experiences, the more we ideate and let our ideas out, because there's no such thing as a silly idea or lame idea or not creative idea. Every idea matters because it's a base for another better and greater idea. So creativity is a process. It's a muscle that we train it. We train it through research, through critical thinking, through reading and collecting data. Okay. So let's explore this a little bit. One of the activities that help our creative confidence, help us create our creative confidence, is looking around us and critically analyze what we see and the designs and the experiences that we go through. So I'm going to do a small activity just to make this a little bit interactive. I want you to look around you and find one object that is designed in two different ways. Okay? I'm going to start just to show you what I mean exactly. So just for the speed of it, I found pictures of what I want to talk about. These two chargers, okay? They both do the same thing. Meanwhile, while I'm talking about this, just look around and find this object that is designed in different ways. And you'll get the chance. I'll ask few of you to share with us what they found, okay? So these are two chargers, different chargers for different laptops, and they do the same function. They charge the laptop. But the number of times I tripped with my charger wire and almost, or sometimes actually dropped my laptop and almost broke it, I can't count these times. So this small feature, the magnet charger in the Mac, actually saved my laptop many, many times. And this is one example of how a small feature that maybe we use it automatically, we don't even think about it, is designed in a way to solve a small problem that not many people thought about, but it's actually very helpful and it actually saves a lot of damages. So this is what I'm trying, I'm asking you to do. Just find an object, any object designed in two different ways. Raise your hand when you find one, or I don't know what's the feature here if you can't raise a hand, but just unmute yourself. Okay, Yusuf, tell us or show us if you can turn your camera on.
Yes, actually, headphones. One is wired, the other is not wired. One is over the head, the other one is just the usual long wire.
So which one do you prefer and why?
I prefer the wireless one because if I want to move around and not stick to my laptop or phone while moving around, I can do that with my wireless headphones, but I cannot do that if I'm wired because I have to take extra care not to do some damage.
Drag your phone.
Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. And maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we didn't think about this. It was normal to have a wire. And then we started, using these Bluetooth or Bluetooth headphones, and we realized how handy they are. Thank you, Yusuf. Anyone else can share with us? You don't have to see the product in front of you. If you can think of it and describe it like Yusuf just did, that would be great. Nijad?
Yeah, a lighter. There's one with plasma and one with butane as the source.
Okay. And can you just quickly explain to us which one you prefer and why, or which features are better for any specific reasons?
Well, I don't smoke, so I wouldn't really know, but I assume the plasma one is better because it's rechargeable with a USB and you don't have to fill it with gas.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Nijad. Anyone else would like to share with us the object? Karen?
Yes, it's not an object, but while talking to you, a taxi driver passed under my house and it reminded me of the traditional taxi and Uber.
Right, okay. That's a very, very good example. And what kind of feature, do you think gives either of these two products or services an advantage?
Yeah, so the normal taxi is adopting a very traditional way that you have to wait a lot of time for him or her to arrive. And while Uber is real time, it uses a different pricing model depending on the demand and how many taxis are available. I think, yeah, so, and Uber also is it works as a transaction enabler, so the taxi driver can find their customers on the web and connect to anyone that are near them, and it saves a lot of fuel as well in cases where taxi companies are so far away and they have to drive all the way to my house. So yes.
Absolutely. Fuel, very relevant problem right now, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. That's a great example for service as well as a product. It's an experience in itself. So it's both combines the products and service, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later. I'm gonna thank you for everyone who participated because we're limited on time. I'm gonna continue with the presentation. If you have more time later on, we can do another exercise. So this shows how if we just look around, and a lot of students after taking the human-centered design course or any design course, they start being more aware of things. Actually, after I started this my design degree, I became annoying. Like nobody wants to hang out with me because I'm like everything. I'm looking at it and like asking question: why is it designed in this way? Why is it not that way? How could I do it better? And this is a very important activity that we can do because it helps us in, you know, developing this creative confidence that I spoke about, this muscle, looking at products and thinking of ways to improve it. So what is design thinking? What's this whole fuss about? Because we're all hearing a lot about this. Design thinking, it's also known as human-centered design, is a user-centered or human-centered approach to innovation or to finding solutions. It draws on the designer's toolkit, so it's a designerly process. It uses all these designing tools and methods to integrate needs of people, so what they desire, what their needs are, the possibilities of technology, so the feasibility of what we have technology-wise. So for example, for instance, you are now leveraging on artificial intelligence to find solutions for accessibility limitations. So the feasibility, technology speaking, and the requirements for a business. So what is viable from a business point of view? This is the definition of Tim Brown. He's a chair at IDEO, one of the most famous design consultancies in San Francisco. So this is where design thinking lives, okay? It's in the middle between desirability, so people's needs, the viability, again, from a business point of view, and feasibility from a technological point of view. As I said at the beginning, it's not only a tool or a framework to solve problems, it's also essential to frame problems, to really find the important problems that we need to focus on and solve. Because there's no point of finding solutions if the base, which is the problem area or the solution space, is not well defined and it doesn't tackle an important and critical need for the users or beneficiaries. It's an approach focused on the users and their needs, and it makes any service, product, systems, even policies more human and user-centered. I'm going to give an example that illustrates the human-centered design or design thinking very well. So as you can see, this is an MRI machine designed by industrial engineer Doug Dietz from General Electric. He designed this machine and he was so proud of it. But after going to the hospital, so Children's Hospital, and looking at how it was used by nurses and doctors, he realized and observed few interesting things. First of all, for children, if you've tried an MRI or been in an MRI machine or you know someone, first, it's very claustrophobic, and also it has the loudest hammer-like noise. It's very uncomfortable for grown-ups, let alone for kids. So he went to this children's hospital and he realized that kids are clinging to their parents and they start crying. He also noticed that the room these MRI machines are put in are very dark and, you know, fluorescent lights are flickering, pretty scary environment. And he also was told that most kids, because you have to be still when you're in an MRI machine, you have to stay still for the whole process. A lot of kids are put under anesthesia to go through this process. And we all know that anesthesia is a risky process, and especially if it's not an intrusive, like a surgery, not an intrusive process that we're going through. It's not really necessary. So he felt this machine that he was so proud of is actually looks like a brick with a hole in it, and it's actually putting children under risk of anesthesia, but also a traumatizing experience. So he thought, why don't we use this human-centered design approach to reimagine this whole experience, okay? To design it in a way that actually don't put kids under such a negative experience, to say the least. So with a team of designers and researchers, they did the research, collected qualitative data, spoke to parents, spoke to nurses and doctors and to kids, and also did an activity, a co-creation activity. It's also called participatory approach in humanitarian developmental sectors. What it does what it says on the tin. So it's the users or the end users or sometimes the service providers are participating in the creation of the output. It's not necessarily them creating it. Of course, their input is not taken for face value, but their input and insights are very essential for the output or the design or the service that we're going to eventually come up with. So as you can see here in this picture, kids were asked to draw what makes them happy, what nice experiences they like to go through, what's pretty for them, what's happy moments for them. And all this input and the data collected was used to redesign this MRI, let's call it experience, right? So not only did they redesign the machines, of course, they also redesigned the whole experience. And today, just a small side note, today we don't design products anymore. We design experiences. From the moment a person, so any designer or group of designers or consultancies want to design something, a product, they don't think about the product itself. They think about the moment the user chooses to purchase this product. So let's say I want to buy a new phone. The moment I decide, okay, I need a new phone and I'm going to look up online what phones I can use based on the features I need, all the way to me unboxing and using my phone. And they redesign the whole thing, or they focus on different stages of the whole experience. So this is what they did here. And they didn't just redesign the machine. They designed the whole experience. From the moment the kid enters the hospital and the room, they sensory experience, they added music and voices and smells, and the whole sensory experience that they involved the kids in has been redesigned. Like here they did the jungle adventure, the pirate island, and they added noises and smells and voices that distract the kids while they're going through this experience. This not only first reduced the number of kids who go under anesthesia because now they're more comfortable. This only got the kids excited to take part of this experience because it's fun. It's almost like a theme park. And obviously, it's a less traumatizing experience for the kids. So this is where human-centered design and actually looking at the kid from the kid's perspective and the parents' perspective helped redesign such a really niche and specific experience that people go through in general that we don't think about it usually. We take it for granted. Okay, go into the machine, go through the process and leave. So what is the human-centered design? Okay, what's this process that we can follow to get on the other end this really user-focused and pleasant, let's call them experiences or products? Human-centered design is a framework. It's based on 5 pillars. We always need to remember that it's not one way. It's an iterative process. We go back and forth through the process. We can sometimes get to the prototype and testing and then realize that we need to collect more data. So go back to, the empathy or define phase. So the empathy is where we learn about our users. The define is where we frame key questions or we frame our problem and define it. We then ideate, brainstorm, and create ideas. Then we build some representations of these ideas and we test them to get feedback from the users. We always need to, trying to, okay, this is meant to be a video, but anyway, so this process is very iterative, like I said. So we're going to fail a lot when we go through this process. We're going to realize that there's missing data, that we need to go and collect data. You were talking about data in the previous session. We're going to go back and forth and reiterate and get feedback and redesign and retest. So it's a process that involves a lot of failure, but we need to go back and see where we can iterate and get feedback to improve the process. So empathy. Empathy really is the first stage, and it's a very critical stage of human-centered design because it forms the base, the launching pad of this whole process. We need to understand and put ourselves in the people's shoes. We need to understand their attitudes and their behavior, their experiences, and also their environment to better design products for them or experiences or services. The first stage of empathizing is to really define the research objective. It's broad, it's a broad brief. In this case, for example, it's accessibility, okay, and limitations in using in accessibility and in using certain services or products or whatever you end up choosing to work on. So we need to a broad definition of the research project or objective. Then we mind map the topic universe. What do I mean by topic universe? The topic universe here is accessibility. We go into mind mapping. So let's say accessibility is the center of this mind map. What do we do here? First of all, mind maps are very, very helpful. They are a way to visualize everything we know about this topic and to know what we want to focus on moving forward and to help ourselves define this brief even further and define the problem that we want to work on. I know, just on a side note, I know that some of you came into this hackathon, you already have maybe solutions in mind, or you know exactly what you want to focus on. But I really invite you, if you haven't gone through this process, and some of you might have gone through this process, to maybe not in this hackathon particularly, but even afterwards, to go through this process and go back to redefine your project or your brief even further using this process, because you might or might not have missed some aspects. But also, of course, it helps you develop your solutions in a more user-focused way. So some of these steps you might have already done them, but we have to go through the whole process, so bear with us. So how do we do this mind mapping thing? So with the research objective in mind, we start brainstorming relevant topic areas, okay, that we want to explore. So what comes to, we can ask ourselves what comes to our mind when we first think about accessibility limitations. What topics or themes could we ask about or could we explore? It could be accessibility in physical buildings, accessibility in learning, accessibility in using certain platforms. And then from each branch, we can even branch out even more sub-themes and sub-topics. And this is going to help us in collecting the necessary data to really frame our problem. After doing this mind map, we do some research, desk research or desk review. It's like literature review, but in more applied frameworks. We benchmark, we look at existing solutions. So all these topic areas that we uncovered, maybe they have been tackled. Maybe there are existing solutions or services or products that tackle these. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we want to look at existing products to see how could we improve? How could we build on these products, right? So it doesn't have, our solutions don't always have to be from scratch. They could always be incremental, so we can build on existing services and products and make them better. So we do this research, we look at existing solutions and we see how we can improve them. We can do also usability testing, so ask users to use existing products and then pinpoint where it goes wrong, what's missing, what could we work on, okay? And then we can craft questions. In the empathy phase, we are collecting data, right? That's through our desk research, but also obviously we need to do our own data collection and ethnographic research. And we use generally two main tools in this area: the observation, and it could be passive observation, so sitting in an environment, certain environment, and watching people do their thing, or participatory observation, and that is being involved with people and doing certain activities, or pretending to be part of an environment, maybe working or eating in a certain place, if it's a restaurant, let's say. And while doing this, of course, we're observing, we're taking notes, and we're looking at how people do things. So we can detect things that stand out, contradictions, and many emotional experiences. The second tool we use are interviews. And these two tools sometimes come hand in hand. So sometimes while you observe and then you find someone that you feel, someone that stands out and you feel like you want to ask them questions. So you interview them. And sometimes it's pre-planned. So you find your user, maybe in this case, in the project or the brief that you're working in right now, you would want to pre-plan this because you know who your target users are. So we craft these questions beforehand, and these questions are crafted based on the research and the mind map that we've done. And before we go and observe and interview people, you might say, okay, why do I need to write the discussion guide, which is a template for questions? I can just swing it. I can improvise. I know this by heart by now because of all the research I've done. Actually, no, you can't, because while you're doing an interview, no matter how experienced we are, we have to figure out what the questions we want to ask are, make sure that we ask all the questions that we have. We also want to focus and hear the user and on the spot interpret what they're saying, so we know what to probe on, what's the next question, what topics we want to explore further. So with all that in mind and us being busy with doing that, we don't want to also think about, okay, what topics do I want to explore? So we need to pre-plan these discussion guides and these interviews. I'm going to just give you a quick example. So let's take this topic area. It has nothing to do with accessibility, but just as an example. So this is a topic area or brief. Explore the ways in which recent immigrants' eating habits and customs have changed since immigrating from China and India to Canada. Okay, we explore different topic areas. One of them is eating habits and customs back home or back in China or India. So these are questions that come out from this topic area. So tell me about meal times back home, who cooks back home, what is the best thing about, you know, Chinese or Indian food, etc. So if we do this for each topic area, then we have a list of questions, list of themes that we want to cover, and also probes or questions that we want to explore further. Even if we don't ask all these questions, that's fine. At least we know in the back of our head that everything is planned. And also, if we want to add questions or something the user says stimulates a different question or a different theme, that's absolutely fine. But at least we have everything sorted. The second stage, after we collect all of this data, is the define. So this is where the first stage was the blue part, where we flared, we collected a lot of data, we were busy with a lot of data. And now the next stage is to focus all of this data, okay, to define what we really want to work on. This is where we have a lot of messy data, right? This fuzzy end, you're confused, what do I do with all of this information? And we want to streamline it. We want to filter it and analyze it to really get to the main point. So how do we do this? There's a very helpful tool called the empathy map. The empathy map, we can use it for individual interviews. So if I did an interview with one person, I could do this, but also a lot of times when we have big data and we have a lot of interviews and data collected from a lot of participants, we can accumulate all this data in one empathy map. I'm going to explain this as if we're doing it for one individual, just for the sake of practicality. So empathy maps is 4 quadrants, the say and do, and then the think and feel. The first 2 quadrants on the left-hand side, the say and do, are directly extracted from the interviews. So it's what people that we interviewed said and what they said they do, or what we observe them do. The think and feel section is what we infer. It's our own analysis, and this clarifies it. So the first 2 quadrants, it's the user. It's only the user, what the user says, what they told us. Ideally, these are direct quotes. And then what they said they do, or what we observed them doing, okay, the activities. And then we infer, and this is where the designer or us, the researchers or the entrepreneurs come into the equation and do their own interpretations. And this is why analyzing this and looking at what people say and do and finding the things that stand out, the contradictions. A lot of times people say they do something, but when we watch them or when we watch them do this thing, they do something completely different. Okay, mainly not because they want to lie, sometimes because they don't want to look vulnerable or look weak or hide certain things, but sometimes because we forget what we actually do. If you ask me how's your morning routine, I might tell you something, but in fact I do something completely different, because you do things automatically and you don't think about them, so you don't memorize them. So this is why the role of the designer or yourselves is very important, to make this interpretation, to think, okay, what occupies the user's thoughts when they're doing this or when they're saying this? What are they thinking? And what are they feeling? What emotions are these users feeling? And what are their fears and worries? And this is very important to design or to frame the problem. But also it's very important to do it when we know the user and their background. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you a quick example of this, but I think we're limited on time. So this is one user, Mona. We were looking at imagining Hamra as a self-sustainable environment, and she was talking about how she likes to try small restaurants and like street vendors, and she discovers the true face of Hamra by having these bonds with these small enterprises. Maybe she's thinking that, okay, why do I need these fancy restaurants if I can enjoy the small, simple, and convenient shops or restaurants? And what she's feeling is potentially proud because she can support these small vendors, but also intimidated by these big and fancy restaurants. And we can say that because what we know about Mona is that she is coming from a rural area, okay, and she comes from Bint Jbeil, and she now lives in Beirut. She's experienced this like busy city life, and she's probably intimidated by all these fancy things. So then we go and try to explore what her needs are. She wants to feel proud. She wants to prove that she knows Hamra and make the best of her experience. So maybe we wonder, and this is how we infer again to find insights, if this means that she feels intimidated, she feels like she might be judged, that she's judged as the provincial, simple person coming from a rural area, or that she that the experiences she is living in her time in AUB contribute greatly to her growth. So we take one of these stories. We choose based on, of course, we use our designly judgment to choose one of these stories and decide to move forward with it. So Mona, she's a student and she comes from Bint Jbeil. She needs to feel proud about supporting small businesses because she feels intimidated by these like big, fancy, maybe unorganic situations. Now that we have sort of a brief, or what we call a user need statement or user need insight statement, we can, now that we define, we want to ideate. We want to start finding solutions. So this is where we start ideating. How do we ideate? We use this and we think, okay, how might we help Mona feel proud about supporting these smaller food businesses? Or how might we feel, this is for addition, and how might we help her feel less intimidated about these bigger places and feel that she can support these small businesses that she likes? So now we're moving to Fleur again. This is where we are again in this process of coming up with generating ideas. This is a divergent part of the process, okay? So how do we ideate? Very quickly, very briefly, never limit yourselves. Whatever comes to your mind goes out on the sticky note, okay? You say it, you write it, you stick it. Don't judge. Don't judge your ideas. As again, I repeat it. There's no idea that is a silly idea or beicha or it's not important, it's not creative enough. Every idea is relevant and it's a base for another better idea. And also your ideas help other team members generate, and it stimulates other ideas for them and vice versa. So whatever comes to your mind, put it on the sticky note. If you're using a mural or online collaborative process, because sometimes it takes time and you're kind of taking this time to judge in your head this idea, do it on a pen and paper and then put it on the mural. Do not think about your ideas. Build on ideas. Always open. Yes and. Never no but. Don't judge your ideas. Stay open. Defer judgment. We're looking for quantity. We're not looking for quality. This is not the time to converge. This is the time to flare. We capture all ideas and be brief. Okay? Go crazy with your ideas. There are a lot of tools. There's the use big brands values, imagining what would Lego do, for example, to solve this problem. This is only to create a lot of out of this world creative ideas, and then we can bring them back to reality and think, okay, how can we turn this idea into a more feasible idea? Or what if we had $1 million to spend? So we're not limited on budget. So all of these tools help us open our mind and come up with generative ideas. And then we make a decision, okay? Again, this is where we want to find our solution, something that is desirable, that is viable, and that is technologically feasible. So most likely to succeed, and most likely to delight the user and make the user happy, because at the end of the day, the user is going to benefit, or the user is going to be the beneficiary. Okay. And the last stage is prototyping and testing. It's a very iterative process. They always come together. There's no point of doing one and not doing the other, because testing actually helps us get feedback and iterate the product. It's not the only iterative part of the process. Again, we can do testing and then go back to redefining or re-ideating. So always keep that in mind. And the earlier you start prototyping, low fidelity prototypes, so paper, like drawing on papers or sketching or making something with papers, the cost of failure is much lower at the beginning. So start prototyping the earliest that you can, okay? Because this is where the cost is low. If you develop a full-on product or wireframe and then you test it and then you find problems, that's going to cost a lot of time and resources. These are a few examples of how we can prototype experiences. You know, we use prototypes and props to even test experiences. So we don't have to necessarily, we don't only prototype when we have a product. Here they were trying to see how they can use storytelling to connect people between generations. So look at how low resolution or low fidelity this prototype is. There's a board with some sticky notes and ask people to write a story. And then the person that comes next would put another sticky notes to continue the story. Here's a more developed version of it, where they did like voice recordings of the stories, and then you record your continuation of the story. And here they were observing people do this thing and seeing how they interact with it. So it's an experience, but they are prototyping the experience. Here as well, this is a prototype, low fidelity, papers, nothing. It costs nothing, takes really little in terms of time, and you can test it and the user can pretend that they're pressing on certain buttons while you assist them in doing that. We can also use usability testing, and I spoke this at the beginning when you're benchmarking. If you get to a stage where you're actually creating wireframes and you're actually testing a product or a service, you can do that early when you're benchmarking, but also after your prototype. So you give a task to the user, you explain how to think out loud, if that's possible, depending on your user. So think out loud is pretty much you're using the product, but also talking out loud to your observer and what you're thinking, so your thought process, or just you watch them perform the activity that you ask them to do. You take a lot of notes, and you can collect feedback from them afterwards, just asking them questions or using the Microsoft Desirability Toolkit. It's pretty much a set of words that describe the experience, but just because when we're asked to describe a feeling or experience, sometimes we can't find the right words, and also it makes it difficult for the researcher. If I say, oh, that was intriguing, the researcher might have to interpret what I mean by intriguing. So if we give them specific words using this Microsoft Desirability Toolkit, you can find it online, or I can send you resources for that, then it kind of helps you maybe collect also quantitative data in terms of feedback on this product or service. So you need to test this experience. You need to imagine the scene that you want to create for your user. Imagine what props could help you bring this whole experience into life, and then the roles or the users that you need to perform this kind of enactment of the experience. Remember, we are creating to think. We are finding proof of concept rather than an actual product. And the last thing, Larissa. Sorry, yes, I think I took way more than.
It's okay, Dana. I know this is a useful content, but I just wanted to ping you if you can wrap it up quickly. Yes. So I think the slides are will really benefit the team to do some prototyping. So perfect. Thank you so much.
No, but I'm almost done. Thank you, Larissa, for yeah. So the last point, which would be, it's not necessarily part of the design thinking process, but it's very helpful in any design process, and especially now that you're in a hackathon and you're probably going to have to present your ideas at the end to a committee. Storytelling is very important. You know, we all hear stories and they get stuck in our head. And if they're memorable, if they're emotional, that's when they really get stuck, and that's when we really sell our idea. So when you're trying to present at the end or tell the story, think about these 5 steps. Okay, so tell the story of your user or your users. So we met the user, their story, their background, or something about them, something emotional about them, the context of this user. We were surprised. So any contradiction, any emotional story that we saw or that they told us, we wonder or we interpret it in this way. So we wonder if this meant or the insight that we came up with when we did the empathy maps and all this analysis. And we aim to convince the room to, so what solution did you come up with? How can you tell the room that this is the best possible solution that someone could find for this problem area? The elevator pitch, you've all heard of it. So imagine yourselves, you have, I don't know, 10 minutes to convince this big shot CEO that this is the idea that they should buy into. So how can we do that? By telling an emotional story. And that's why try to use the stories that you hear from your users or you see your users go through to embed it in your story, in your presentation, in pitch, to make it more human. So not only the whole research process is human-centered, but also how you tell the story should be human and relatable. And we want people to relate to any story we are telling. Thank you so much for listening. Sorry for taking extra 10 minutes. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Maybe we don't have time, but this is my email and this is the IDPP email address. We are always happy to help you. If you want to send us an email, send me or the IDPP will help you. We're happy to answer any questions and help you out with your project in this hackathon. Thank you so much. And yeah, good luck on your hackathon and your ideas.
Thank you so much, Dana. So, Dr. Dana, and we have one question in the chat. If you can answer it by typing, this would be great. So, because the next speaker is here already. And for all the teams, both sessions now were really focused on the user and on prototyping. I hope you benefited from them. Dr. Dana, feel free to also share some resources in the chat, and the teams will have them if you want to share that with them, some links on how to do low-res prototyping or anything else.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
And now we will jump into the Lean Canvas session. And this is more directed into the business if you want a solution that you're solving. We have Dr. Munay Tani with us. She's the coordinator of the Entrepreneurship Initiative at AUB. And she's an active speaker for women social entrepreneur and change makers. So Dr. Muna, let us know if you can hear us, and the floor is yours. You can share your screen and start. Sorry for being 10 minutes late.
No worries. Hi, Larissa. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly. Okay, nice slides.
Thank you. So I just would like to ask you if you can see my slides in the right way, or is it flipped?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's you, and next to you have some slides.
Great. Yes, that's it. Okay. So I believe if somebody clicks on my camera, they will be able to see it bigger, right?
Yes, correct. I can see your big camera.
Okay, awesome. All right, so hi everyone. I can recognize some familiar names in the participant list. So those of you who know what I'm already talking about, like, feel free to help me with this presentation. I would really like to hear from you. And for those who are new to this, I hope that you will be benefiting and learning something new today. So I will be really talking to you about how to think of your innovation or a solution as like a sustainable business. So you don't always have to think of your innovation or solution as a business, but in the Entrepreneurship Initiative, for example, at MSFEA, and we are partners in this hackathon, we would like to encourage our students and the youth to always try to think of their solutions as potential business, because this will increase the chances of making this sustainable. So it is definitely not the only way to make it sustainable. You can commercialize your innovations in different ways through licensing and other ways. However, entrepreneurship remains to be one of the most common ways and one of the most motivating ways for the innovator, him or herself, or the innovator team themselves. I'm going to be talking more about the lean startup methodology. It's going to be a quick presentation, and like feel free to stop me whenever you want to ask any question. I'm fine with that. You can unmute and ask. I don't think I will be looking at the chat too much, so yeah, don't rely on me looking at the chat. So basically, in the lean startup methodology, which is the most popular methodology for entrepreneurship in the 21st century, and which is a methodology that stemmed from the Silicon Valley, which is the hub of entrepreneurship in the world and innovation and tech startups, really, in the world. There was a new methodology that came in maybe around 10 to 15 years ago that says that instead of us creating new solutions in the labs and waiting for them to be perfect before we launch, we have to really start testing and interacting with potential users very early on. And I really like that my role comes usually after the design thinking approach or the human-centered design, because you always start with the human-centered design first, and then you think of the business side. So this is the right order of things. You always have to think user first. What's my problem? What do they need? Empathy, doing the empathy maps. And only after that, you can build your prototype and then start testing it with real customers and seeing what this solution could actually look like. So these two methodologies, which is the design thinking methodology or the human-centered design and the lean startup methodology, they work very nicely together. And we always use them together in the entrepreneurship initiative at the Maroun Sam'an Faculty of Engineering and Architecture. As you can see next to me, there is a loop. And this is the loop that is mostly known for what we call the lean startup methodology. It's what we call the build, measure, learn loop. So after I have a solution in mind, I have to build it. So this is like the rapid prototyping. And then I have to directly test it with potential users, with real customers. And this is where I measure. How did they interact with it? What did they like? What didn't they like? What went wrong? What were the challenges? What could be better? I learn from all of this, and then I go and maybe I change my idea or solution, I build again and continue this loop. So the faster I do this, the better. The faster I learn from my mistakes, the better. Sometimes I will learn that maybe what I have in mind, the best idea in the world, isn't actually going to work. And it's okay to fail. So the lean startup methodology really favors quick experimentation, quick iteration, quick testing, and quick failure. And so it doesn't say that failure is something bad or wrong, but on the contrary, failure is good if you fail early. And if you fail fast, because this means that you'll be able to learn and launch again. And a lot of successful companies and startups in the world actually failed several times and launched several times before they were able to succeed. So we always say launch fast, fail fast, because it's not always easy, or it's never easy to really find this perfect product market fit that you are trying to bring to the market. So in order to do that, you need a lot of iteration, a lot of changes, and a lot of failure, basically. So this is how really the lean startup and the design thinking methodology that you just saw work hand in hand. So as you can see, when we talk about empathy and defining the problem, this is where really we talk also about customer discovery and customer validation. We really need to understand who are our customers and whether what we have in mind suits them. This is another diagram that shows you how the lean startup methodology and human-centered design work nicely together. So after you empathize, you define and you ideate, you go into this build, measure, learn loop that I just talked about. And that is very essential in the modern startup world. So today I'm going to be talking mostly to you about the lean model canvas. So I'm just going to double check that you still see the right screen. Sorry about that. Yes, okay, great. The lean model canvas is really your 20-minute business plan. It's a really easy tool to use in order to make sure that you have thought of different business components of your solution. I'm going to maximize it a little bit so that you see. So as you can see, we have 9 boxes here. And I'm going to be talking to you about each and every single one. And again, if you have any questions, just stop me. I hope while I do this, you start thinking of your own idea and start thinking of how this relates to your own idea or solution. Of course, you always start with the problem. And this is what also we just heard from human-centered design. We always need to understand what you're trying to solve first. And then so basically we go from left to right. So this is like the order usually, the problem first and then the customer segments. Like, who are my customers? What are their demographics? What are their characteristics? Where are they located? What's their age group? What is their gender? What is their educational background, socioeconomic status? Who are my early adopters who will be more likely to adopt this solution at the very early start? So all of these questions, you need to think about them starting now. Also, if you go to the middle of it, there's the unique value proposition. This is what makes you unique. Why would somebody prefer your solution over other solutions? And I remember in the kickoff, we heard a lot of comments but I know there are a lot of solutions out there that target accessibility and target, certain issues that you might be thinking of. So what makes you unique? You have to figure out a magic sauce, something that you can do better than others, and it should be of real value. This is the unique value proposition that you always need to think about and nail. What's your solution? What are you exactly offering here? What is the high-level technical solution that you're offering, and how will your user be able to use it? What's your unfair advantage? Like, why you? Why are you able to do this and not just anybody else who will hear your pitch? Why shouldn't you be afraid of somebody coming and copying you if they heard your great idea? And this is always a big misconception, the world of entrepreneurship. We always are afraid that people might copy our idea, but if you have a real unfair advantage, you should never be afraid of that, because it shouldn't be that easy to copy. You should have certain skill sets or connections or expertise or experience that will set you apart from any other group that will come and say, I'm going to do the same thing. What are your revenue streams? How are you going to make money? And again, why do we care about making money? Because we care about sustainability. We want this to be a sustainable solution that can survive on its own. What is your cost structure? What will you be incurring as costs? What are your main operational and other capital costs that you need to incur? How are you going to measure? This is the key metrics. How are you going to measure your success? If you are working towards one of the 4 verticals we talked about, the community, education, and the others, how do you measure your success? How do you measure that you're really making lives of people with disabilities better? How do you measure that you have an effective solution? Okay, so all of these are metrics you need to have in mind. And finally, the channels. How are you going to reach your customers? What is your marketing strategy? How are you going to make people know that you exist and that they need to start using your solution? If you would like to think of your solution as a social business instead of a business, this is also possible. So when we talk about accessibility, for example, and we're talking about social good, we're talking about reducing inequalities, and you can see behind me sustainable development goals. So you can really map your solution to several sustainable development goals, or what we call the UN 2030 agenda. And if you would like to think of it as a social business, then you can. And we also have something called the social business model canvas, which is very similar to the lean model canvas. However, it has 2 additional components, which are the purpose and the impact. So as you can see, they are at the top of the social business model canvas. And really the purpose is, why are you doing this? So it has to do, for example, here with accessibility. It has to do with improving people's lives. It has to do with inclusion, reducing inequalities. And finally, the impact. What's the impact? What's your long-term goal? What's the long-term vision? How will you be able to change the status quo? How will you be able to change on the long run, the current situation? So this is the impact. Is always a long-term thing. So I'm going to start talking about each and every component one by one. As I just mentioned, the purpose for a social business model canvas is really, why are you doing this? And it always has to be a social purpose. The impact is your long-term impact. So what's the goal? What's your long-term vision For example, this will really make inclusion possible, let's say, if you're talking about inclusion in the workplace or inclusion in education. So this will be the impact. Now I will move to the lean model canvas, and as we said, it has 9 components, and I'm going to be covering each one on its own, and I'm going to be trying to take a fictitious solution, or if anybody would like to volunteer to share their idea, of course in a high level way, I would be more than happy to take it and run it through as an example. So any volunteers on that? No volunteers? Okay, so I'm gonna just like take any example from my mind. So when we talk about the problem, you really need to have a good understanding of the problem in hand. And I believe you're gonna be seeing this later on in the pitch, also like how to create the pitch and like the art of pitching. In the pitch, we always start with the problem. If you may ask why, it's simply because when you are trying to tell someone else who has no idea about what you're doing, they haven't been there, you know, throughout the thinking process, they don't have the background, they don't have the story behind it. You need to tell them first, why is this important? Like, why is the problem that you chose significant? So this is why we start with the problem, to get to convince others that what we're doing is worthwhile, what we're doing means something and is important. Whenever you want to talk about the problem, we usually talk about like maybe shocking facts, shocking figures, statistics. So for example, some people might tend to think that people with disability are a very small minority in the society, but you may want to surprise us with a statistic that shows us that this is not insignificant. It's actually major, especially, for example, when it comes to temporary disability. Like, and honestly, that was something new to me, and I could relate really well. Like, I have 3 kids, so I was pregnant for 3 times, and I realized that I did have a temporary disability several times throughout my life, and I never thought of it that way. I just thought that, you know, it was like me, and it was like I couldn't do things, but I didn't think of that the world wasn't equipped enough to accommodate me with my temporary disability or my situation and my pregnancy back then. So whenever we talk about the problem, we need to have like the big problem, and then under it, why is this problem a problem? So for example, if you decide to work on, I don't know, I really need help here with an example. I don't know if anybody has a good example to share with us. Whenever we talk about disability, for example, I don't know, it could be, any ideas? Larissa, help?
Yeah, some maybe hearing problems. Maybe we're trying to solve. Let me get an idea. We have a lot of wheelchair problems.
Okay.
So a lot of people are in physical aid track are trying to solve, the wheelchair problem. We have, people with learning disabilities. We also, you want a solution or you want a problem?
No, I want the problem. Okay, I think I'll stick to the learning disability because I can relate AI better. I'm interested to know how you're gonna be using AI for like mobility and wheelchairs. That's really interesting, but I have nothing in my mind. So I'll use learning disabilities because it's easier for me to relate the two. So basically, if we're talking about learning disabilities, right? And like, by the way, this is really significant. Like we have a lot of people, like, I don't know what's the percentage. I haven't done the research. You have to do it. You need to start with, for example, we are tackling the problem of learning disability, which is significant. Like this is the percentage. Why is this a problem? Because this much percentage of people just leave school and they never come back. Those who have learning disabilities, they end up without a decent income. This will affect the society, it will affect the economy, it will affect their families, okay? So all of these are sub-problems. So we started with this like big umbrella of learning disability that we are all aware of, we've all heard of it, but maybe we haven't thought of the sub-problems. Like, why is this important? Why is this problem a problem? What are some consequences of this problem that make it worthwhile to look into and worthwhile to find a solution for? So this is what we mean by top 3 problems. They shouldn't be disconnected. They should be all connected and under the bigger problem. Okay, for example, if you talk about learning disability, I know there are several types of learning disabilities. You may want to work specifically on a certain type or segment or category of learning disability. Again, I haven't done the research. You need to do the research first, really understand the problem, and then narrow it down and say, okay, this is what we really need to do. Now, whenever we talk about the problem, we also need to be aware about the existing alternatives. What are the existing alternatives? Meaning any solutions that are out there that can help alleviate this problem, regardless whether or not they are direct competitors. Okay, so this is really, yes, we're talking about the competition here. Who else exists in the market? But there's a very important distinction that you need to keep in mind. If you're, for example, doing AI solutions for learning disabilities, you should not just research AI solutions for learning disabilities. So this is very important, and it's a very common misconception. Usually, our students only research direct competition, and they end up saying, oh, like we couldn't really find, you know, an existing alternative that does the same exact thing, and you're like losing the whole purpose here. Any alternative is an existing alternative. For example, those special schools that are super expensive, or maybe I don't know, they might have a million problems with them, but they are still an alternative, even though they might not be, you know, affordable to everyone or accessible to everyone or abundant, but still they exist. So they are an existing alternative. Other alternatives could be, for example, some, you know, Microsoft maybe has, I don't know, done something to accommodate certain learning disabilities. So again, even if it's not exactly the same solution that you have in mind, it's still an alternative. So here you have to really research and list and think of everything that already exists, and don't be biased. We tend to be biased if we have this great idea, and this will also feed into your pitch later on. So if you do the Lean Business Model Canvas properly, I promise you your pitch will be like as easy as pie to prepare. So this is for the problem. Then, as I mentioned, we move usually to the right-hand side of the Lean Canvas, and I'll tell you maybe why before I move on. Because if you look at the Lean Canvas as a whole, you will see that if you divide it in the middle, the right-hand side is really talking about the market, who the customer is, how to get to your customers, how to make money from them. And the left-hand side really talks about your product. So what's the problem? What's your solution? How do you measure your success? What it's gonna cost you? So this is why, as you may imagine, it's very important for us to look into both the product and the market. And this is why we do this back and forth between the left-hand side and right-hand side, because they're equally important. So now I looked at the product, like product perspective on what problem I'm trying to solve. Now I need to look at the market perspective, like who is my customer segments. So here we're talking about our target customers. And for example, again, let's take the learning disability example. Then you have to specify, like you cannot tell me anyone with learning disabilities. It's never like anyone, because people with learning disabilities at the age of 90 are very different than people with learning disabilities at the age of 2 or 3. Okay. So, and when you say anyone, yes, it could be someone with 90. Don't tell me, oh, you took an extreme case. No, if you say anyone, it's really anyone. So you always have to specify who your target customers are. And if you want to deal with kids, then it's kids, and you specify their age group. If you want to deal with young professionals or adults, then you say adults. You have to specify an age group, and we don't usually recommend for this age range to be wide at the beginning. You always need to understand that at the very beginning of your solution, like since it's still a baby now, like you are building something up from scratch. So you have to start very, very small and very targeted. And later on, you can definitely expand and widen your age group. You can widen your product portfolio. You can widen your problem. and you can have multiple solutions. But to start with, it's very like unrecommended to have, you know, like a wide age range. I'm like doing this for everyone. I have like 10 problems I'm trying to solve. I have 10 solutions. This is a big warning sign, because this is a recipe for failure when it comes to startups and starting small. Again, you are starting small, very little resources. Even if you win this thing, you still will have little resources. Like whatever money you're gonna get out of this is not significant to the extent that you are able to create something huge at the beginning. So you always have to think, I need to start small. So if I need to start small, it means I have to be very, very targeted. So in the target customers, you have to identify the age range. So for example, let's take learning disabilities for kids, okay? But I don't want to tackle super young kids. So I'm gonna be taking, for example, elementary school kids. So starting the age of, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old up to 10, 11. You can do that. Okay, so who are they? Are they living in the urban areas or in the rural areas? You have to specify that. Are they coming from, you know, from the upper class, from the middle class, from the lower class? You have to really identify like their socioeconomic status. And why does that matter? Because if you have identified them wrongly, then it might change everything. So if you want to target the less privileged, for example, then you have to find a revenue stream that does not depend on them paying for the service, right? So it should be somebody else. If you are looking at people of high income, then yes, probably they can pay for it themselves. Okay, so all of this will feed into your thinking process and into the solution itself. You think about the geography, where are they located? As I mentioned, maybe you can tell me what kind of disability they have. Is it severe? Is it mild? Okay, you really need to specify it as much as you can. And then your early adopters, like who are the first people to adopt this thing? So if you're talking about kids, then the kids cannot adopt it themselves. So it should be someone else, right? It should be either the parents or the school or, I don't know, the government or something else. So you really need to think, who is that early adopter? And here, by the way, especially when we talk about social solutions, sometimes your customers and users are different. Customers are those who will be paying for your service or product, and the users are those who will be using it. So in this example, kids are not going to be paying for this, even if they're rich, right? Like they don't have the money. So it will be either, again, the parents or the schools or some other party. So you have to differentiate between your users, who will be the kids. You're changing the lives of the kids, but the customers are somebody else. They are their parents or their schools or their community center, or I don't know, some other parties. So you really need to identify who your early adopters are. Again, what are their characteristics? And you can, here's where we sometimes start, like I'm going to start within a certain geographic area, although I'm doing something that's online, which means it can scale. I'm not really bound by the borders of any country. However, to be realistic, to be strategic, I have to start somewhere, because when it comes to marketing, and we're going to talk about marketing in a second, you can't just market this everywhere. Like, cannot market it globally. It takes, I don't know, millions of dollars to do that, and you don't have that money. So this is why you always start concentrated in a specific area. You do your marketing efforts in one place, and then after some success, some traction, some credibility, you will expand to other places. Now let's talk about the unique value proposition. This is very important because, as I mentioned before, this is your secret sauce. This is what makes you stand apart from other people who are trying to do something similar. This is what sets you apart from the global competitors, the global tech companies, Google and Microsoft, and the other companies that are also working on accessibility solutions, on AI solutions. So, and this might be a bit frustrating, like, how can I be better than Google and Microsoft? You don't have to be better than Google and Microsoft, but your solution should have something special about it that will drive people to use it, that will convince potential customers to adopt it, and especially your early adopters, that it's worth trying and worth giving it a shot. So this is where I remember in one of the info sessions we were talking about localization. If you would like to target the Arab world, for example, and the Arab speaking community, then you might definitely have an edge over those international companies that we just talked about, because you might have this in Arabic. You have Arabs working on this. It's like native, language, not just translated. And it might have a better user experience with those communities that are more familiar and more comfortable with Arabic than another language. So it could be anything. It doesn't have to be just that, but you really have to think of what makes us stand out. And I advise you to move away from the common, cliche descriptions such as we are more efficient. Like, you won't know this right away, right? Like, it takes time to know if you're more efficient, or we are of a better quality. Like, what makes you so sure right now? Like, a prototype is not enough to tell if your quality is better, or if we're faster, like, again, or like we're less expensive. Never use like we're like less expensive, because you cannot tell from now how expensive you will be, because pricing is something that you can't figure out right now. It needs more time for you to know what your costs are and then to figure out a price. So I invite you to move away from those common things that young entrepreneurs talk about and that are usually not convincing for the jury. So try to find better differentiators than those. And as you can see at the bottom of this rectangle, we have something called high-level concept. This is, I would say, optional. If you're struggling with it, it's fine if you don't do it. But it would be really nice to find an analogy of what you're doing with something else that is well known. So, for example, YouTube is the Flickr for videos. Like YouTube, of course, now you know it so well. But maybe when it started, Flickr was more, more known. It was more popular. So Flickr was known for photos. It would be good to say YouTube is the Flickr for videos, because it will make people understand what you're talking about. So whenever you use those analogies, if possible, if applicable, it will really help your audience understanding what you're talking about and relating better with your solution. Now we come to the solution itself, which is, again, like in the pitch usually, especially if we're talking about a business audience. I know that in this hackathon, you need to talk in more depth about the technology that you use, because there are criteria that have to do with the technology. But sometimes in like business competitions, entrepreneurship competitions, where there isn't like grades or scores on the technical aspect, you wouldn't go in depth in the technical side in a pitch. So you would keep it like high level. You wouldn't go in depth unless somebody asks you for that. And in this pitch, I know that you have some AI experts in the jury, so you would probably need to talk a little bit more about it. But again, even if that's the case, you always need to explain your technical complexity in simple terms. And this is also a common misconception or a common mistake with engineering students mostly, and like computer scientists and technical people in general, is that they tend to directly start talking their technical jargon, and because they know it so well, they would believe that everybody understands what they're talking about, which is not the case. So again, in the jury, you will have some AI experts, but you will have some business experts who know nothing about AI. So you need to strike this balance of showing your technology and showing why this is great, but at the same time, doing it in very, very simple terminology that anybody can understand. I know that this is tricky, and usually it takes some training, but you have this, like, it is your responsibility to find the sweet spot on how you describe your solution, to explain the technology behind it, but also to keep it as simple as possible. And one way to do that is to simply tell me, what does it do? Like, what? Okay, it's like AI. Okay, great, but what does it do, right? So in the maybe solution slide, You don't have to talk to me about the deep learning and the neural networks, and I don't know what some like metric indicators and numbers of how well it has performed, but maybe you can say this a little bit later. But you need to tell me, what does it do? How would I as a user benefit from it? How would somebody with learning disability use this thing? And you should explain it in like ordinary words, like it's an app, for example, that you download, or it's an app that you can use online. You only need a username and password, and you can sign up by your own. So you have to really explain how it works, and again, in as simple terms as possible. The unfair advantage is, as I mentioned earlier, why would you, as the team behind the solution, do a better job at it than anyone else? And here we hope that you were able to find the right team to do this. The team that is interdisciplinary, the team that has some AI geeks, and at the same time some those business, gurus and people who are really knowledgeable about the world of accessibility. Of course, if you don't have all the people you need in the team, you can always keep looking, and maybe in the ask at the end say, we're looking for an expert in this or that field that will complement our team and make it perfect. That is not something that is weird or extraordinary to say, but you have to pinpoint why you are the right team to do this thing. And usually, again, it could be either you have the right skill set, the right mix, the right experience. So like you already have experience with people with disabilities, or you have already experience in AI, or you have worked with similar apps before and you know how they could be better. Maybe you have the right connections in the NGO world, which you will need in order to find the customers for your solution. So there are many ways that you can think of in order to be differentiated as a team. Again, not as a product, but as why do we do it better than someone else if they learned about our idea. Now the fun part, especially if you're not that familiar with business and with financial forecasts. I know some people don't like to think of this early on, but it is crucial to start thinking how are we going to make money? How can we make this sustainable? And you don't have at this point or this level to tell us how much money you're going to make or to show us your financials. If you can do that, that's great. Honestly, it might give you a push, but it's not expected or asked. But at least you need to think of how am I going to make money? Like, is it going to be, through, is this a software as a service that people will pay a subscription fee to have? Is this something that, you need to install and you have to pay a setup fee and then, a maintenance fee, for example? Is it an app where you can download it for free and then you will have access to some premium features that you can pay for? So you just have to think of how am I going to make money? And if, again, you're thinking of this as a social enterprise, you might want to think of multiple revenue streams and not just one, because in social enterprises, it's a little bit more tricky to strike this balance in terms of cost and revenue. So to find sustainability, we usually have to be very innovative and think of different revenue streams. So again, in simple words, a revenue stream is how are we going to make money? And again, the ultimate goal is to be sustainable, okay? The cost structure is what costs am I going to incur to make this happen, to make this real? So definitely you have technology costs, you're doing AI, so definitely you have technology costs. Again, I don't expect you to have specific numbers, but it wouldn't be too early either to start think of these numbers. So for example, you need, Amazon Web Services, you need certain licenses to certain AI, engines that will allow you to create those AI tools and so on. So you need some technology costs. You definitely need personnel costs and pay salaries for you as a team and maybe other people who will join your team. You definitely need to pay on marketing because marketing is a costly exercise. It's a costly function. You might need to pay on, I don't know, branding. There are many other things that you can think of. And we just need to think, okay, what does my cost structure look like? What are the main things that I need to take care of to make this a reality? Now we move to the key metrics. The key metrics are very important in your case, simply because you are striving to make a difference in the world. You are striving to make a difference in the world of accessibility and people with disabilities. And as you remember, this was like one of the criteria. You have to show how you are improving the education or the community or the workplace. And there's like a fourth one. So you need to put certain measures, and you have to put in place a certain mechanism to measure if you are on the right path, if you are actually making the change that you are promising. So these are the key metrics. Again, you don't have to put numbers right now, but you have to measure, like, and when we talk about metrics, we usually talk about short-term, medium-term, long-term metrics. So on the short term, if this is a SaaS, you know, the number of subscribers, number of users, number of hours spent on this thing, the revenues generated. On the medium term, it could be how are we contributing to making their lives easier, to making their learning disabilities, you know, catered for, to have more inclusion. And maybe in the long term, how are we really making society more inclusive and giving more opportunities to people with disability? How are we making their economic status better? How are we changing their lives? So this could be like a more long-term metric, and you have to put, like, you know, certain measures. For example, it could be, you know, like the improvement in their economic income, like, you know, maybe not just them, but their whole family. A number of employment opportunities created for people with disabilities, let's say. So this could be something that is a bit more long-term if you're talking about kids. So it takes more time to go there, to reach that level. And finally, the channels, which are, again, if you think about it, your go-to market strategy. So what should I do in order to reach the customers that I talked about at first? So if we are talking about, as we mentioned, like parents of people with learning disabilities between the age of 7 and 11, how can I reach them? Where are they available? So are they, for example, part of certain groups? Where are these groups located? Are they in specific social clubs that meet physically every now and then? Are they part of certain circles, maybe Facebook groups, or I don't know, LinkedIn circles? For example, are there specific magazines that, or newsletters, or whatever, it could be online, definitely doesn't have to be physical, that target this issue and that have access to people who face this issue? So this could be a channel that I want to use. Are there specific NGOs who work with these people specifically? Then this could again could be a channel. Are there specific schools that work with these people specifically, my target audience, my target customers, and that I can partner with to reach my audience? So even if the school is an existing alternative, there is nothing wrong with thinking of it as a partner and not as a competitor. Not all of your competitors need to be real competitors. You can leverage on many of them as partners and as channels where you will have a win-win situation, especially if you are complementing what they're doing. So always think about it as such, especially if you're thinking of it as a social solution, as a social endeavor to make the world a better place. So I hope this was helpful, guys. I hope that you started thinking of this. So it only gets interesting once you start applying this to your own idea, to your own solution that you have in mind. So I really hope that this was beneficial, and I'm here if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muna. I loved your slides, actually. So thank you so much. I also benefited from this. Let's see if we have questions in the chat. And please feel free to unmute and ask questions. The session is really interesting, and you need to apply like the Lean Canvas, as Dr. Muna said, to your solution. So please ask questions if you have any. And feel free to open the cam. We can also take a picture while waiting for some questions, so we can keep it in our archive of this hackathon. So Yusuf Jafar has a question.
Yeah. Okay, yes, Yusuf, actually, there are two main scholars that talked about the lean startup methodology and contributed to to its existence really and becoming popular. They are Eric Ries and Steve Blank. And they both have written books, and sometimes they have collaborated in like joint works where they talked about this thing. Yes, there is a book by Eric Ries on the lean startup, and there are some books and like publications by Steve Blank as well on the lean startup too. You do not need to include, Nijad, the lean canvas in the pitch as the canvas. It's very wrong to do that actually, because usually in the pitch, in the slides of the pitch, you don't like have crowded slides, lots of information, and as you could see, the lean canvas is not small, so it will have a lot of information there. So you don't put it as is. However, a lot of the components that I talked about, so I talked about 9 different components, maybe 7 of those will be put in different slides, in like 7 slides. So the problem will be 1 slide, the solution will be 1 slide. For example, unique value proposition is 1 slide, your revenue streams is 1 slide, your key metrics is 1 slide, your channels is 1 slide. So we usually like transfer a lot of that into the pitch, but in separate slides, and you just need to organize them in a way that makes sense, where you start with a really compelling story, and then you tell us why what you're doing is really important, and then you show us what are you trying to do, and why is it different from others, and why do you have edge. Exactly. So it will be divided into different slides. So I'm sure the trainer who will be talking to you about the pitch will explain this really well.
Yes, so tomorrow we have the how to pitch training, so make sure you join, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we don't have any other question, thank you so much, Dr. Mona. If you have a specific question, please ask them in the
we have a
Teams.
hand, George.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, doctor.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Yes, I just want to ask, really in general, and the judging criteria we're asked for business feasibility and the social business model. And now you mentioned that at this stage we don't really have to have or know what the price of the product will be, not to be mentioned at this stage, but what should we include just to have like the minimum required information for this area?
Yes, so yeah, what we mean by feasibility and by social business model is that these are 2 different things. The social business model is that you have thought of a way to make money and make this sustainable. So as long as you present to us in the pitch that I'm gonna be making revenues through, you know, sales of this or subscription of that, or like you have just to tell us how. If that makes sense to the judges, then you're good on the business model. On the feasibility, it's really about not just the financial. I don't think it's really about the financial feasibility. It's more about feasibility of the solution as a whole. Like, because sometimes we have pitches that are too ambitious, you know, like they will pitch a huge solution that will take Microsoft to implement, you know. So is it feasible for you as a team of you know, interdisciplinary people, and you're gonna definitely talk about your skill set and who you are? Will your team be able to implement this and make it a reality? So this is what we really mean by feasibility. Like, is it realistic to execute this and implement it in real life with the like minimal resources that you have? So this is really what we mean by feasibility, and judges are very expert in this, and they will be able to tell whether you're dreaming like unrealistically or whether you are being realistic and yes, you're dreaming big, but having very solid small steps to start with and know exactly the roadmap for you to get to the, you know, bigger dream. So this is what we mean by feasibility. I hope it helps.
Thank you. Yes, so also on that note, how specific should we have the problem? What if we are trying to solve a problem or two problems, for example, that are part of the same product? Should we talk in details about both or just focus on one?
Usually, yes, it's better to have one problem. In the world of startups and entrepreneurship and innovation, whenever you say, I'm solving two problems, yeah, like a lot of people just shut off, like, no, you're doing it the wrong way. So whenever you explain it as if you're solving multiple problems, this is a really bad sign, because you are starting from nothing. You know, like now if Microsoft comes and tells me, like, I have this bundle of solutions for people with disability and we're solving, I don't know, 10 problems, I will buy it, right? Like, they can do it. They have the expertise, they have the team, they have the money, they have the audience, but you don't have that. Okay, so again, you are working on something that is new, and it should be solving a very specific problem. And believe me, I've been into a lot of entrepreneurship, competitions, hackathons, and so on. The more specific the problem is, the more specific the solution is, it's going to be way better than others. And I think it's a big misconception that we think, oh, but that's like too small, it's not so interesting, it won't be that appealing. On the contrary, it's exactly the other way around. The more specific, the more interesting it is, because this is what will make them feel, oh, wow, like they really seem to be knowing what they're talking about. They seem to have really gotten the hang of this and know exactly what they want. Whereas if you keep it, very fluffy, I'm solving this huge problem, and like not just this problem, but another problem, and I have multiple solutions, like this is not very realistic, because again, it's all about how you want to implement it. The more specific, the easier it will be.
Yes, okay. So, but it is possible. I mean, there are things that are features that are nice to have, and they are not really going to be novel or
Yeah.
or something that will take time to develop compared to the main problem. Can they still be mentioned, or should they be omitted as features, not as part of a problem and solution, as features of a product?
Yeah. What I like most is for you to have a roadmap. And because when you talk about the lean startup methodology, we start with what we call a minimum viable product. The minimum viable product should have very minimal features that are not nice to have, but must have, and that your customers will fall in love with, your users mostly. So this is where I would advise you to eliminate or omit for the time being any nice to have features, and put them in the roadmap. Like, don't say I'm never gonna do this. No, say this is what I'm gonna start with. This is my unique value proposition. This is what others failed to address or to consider. This is what will make my customers want to use it. I'm going to do this really well, and then I will add the other features that are easy to add, like, I don't know what you have in mind. And you say, this is our roadmap. We'll start with this, and we'll add this and this and that. Again, we all know that this will evolve with time. It will have many features as you continue with it. But to start with, don't overcrowd it with a lot of features. It has to be unique with, again, like the unique features that make you stand out.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Judge, for your questions. I hope that was helpful for everyone.
Hi, Mona. I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. So actually the problem is like we don't have everything ready in the prototype. Okay. So what is the exact timeline that we can give, like this product will be ready in so and so duration? So it should be like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or like how should we give that timelines?
Yeah. So my answer to you, because I know that will be assessed over your prototype. So the prototype could be simply, for example, if you're doing like the AI, it could be simply that AI part, the simulation of how it's, is responding and like its performance. That could be the prototype for now. I believe that you have to show some results in terms of your prototype by the end of the hackathon. So it will be part of your final pitch on the 26th of June if you make it to the finals round. But the full prototype that you will actually ask users to test, of course you have more time for that. It doesn't have to be even a month. It could be 3 months, 4 months. That's I think up to 6 months is usually acceptable, I would say, but not more, because otherwise you're not doing the lean startup methodology. It's taking too long. But again, like, think of your prototype for the hackathon as the simplest thing that you want to try and test to just make sure that it performs well. You know what I mean? And that you have something unique. Like, again, you have to find this unique edge versus other solutions. So this is what we need to see for the hackathon. And I don't know if Larissa has maybe more something to add on that point.
Yes, correct, 100%. So you don't need to have a fully working prototype. We need to make sure, like, the judges need to see that you're capable of understanding maybe how your prototype would be done or would be finished, and they would need to check, and this maybe you would prove it if you started with something small in your prototype and you showed that you maybe tried something, this is the result, and this is the next step that you would be going into. So it's really important to show this. This will also show the strengths of your team, the technical side.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mona, and thank you, Larissa. That answers my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the
Thank you so much.
Anyone
else? Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. It seems like fine, I believe.
Yes. So if you have any follow-up question, ask in the chat, ask on the Teams channel, and we're here to support you, even if the sessions are done, because you have like 2 days to finalize your pre-recorded video, and this needs to have everything that we discussed now in order for you to make it to the final. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Mona, and thank you for this great session.
Best of luck to everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. If you need to take 1 minute break, we can take a picture in this break. If you feel you're a bit tired, we can take a picture, and then our next speaker is here. We can start. Do you want to take a picture? No one needs to be in in a good. If you want. Oh, Basil is here. Okay. We can take it just to keep it in our archive, and feel free to open the cam if you want, and just smile. Thank you. Hello, Hisham. Okay. Anyone else would like to join the picture? Okay, I'm here for the pictures. I like to keep my memories. Hi, George. Okay, if anyone would like to join, okay, let me do one thing. I'll go into the together mode. We're sitting now, I'll send it in the chat. We're sitting in a room. So just smile and do the thumbs up. Cheese. Okay, great. I'll send it. I'll show you what I did. I'll send it in the Teams. Okay, so you can grab maybe something for a small break. Now, a 1 minute break. And meanwhile, I'll introduce the speaker, the next speaker, and he can share his screen so we can begin. Okay. Oh, someone else joined. Wait a minute. 2 new people joined. Join again. There were a girl. Okay. Join again for a picture. I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry, my name is Mira and the name isn't showing, sorry.
Yeah, don't worry. Okay, wait a minute. You can just use the snipping tool and take a picture. This is what I do. So cheese. Okay, I took another one. Great, then. Okay, everyone for joining the picture. So now, let me introduce the next speaker. We're going now into a technical talk. Yes, George, you have a question?
Yes, I have a small question about Teams. I don't know, the chat is not working for me. I don't know if this is the first time I use Teams, so I don't know.
Oh, it was working before and now it's not working?
No, it wasn't working since we started. I can't see the chat of others, and I can't chat.
Okay. So George, don't worry. You can now unmute and ask questions. We will check with you why this is happening, and we'll get back to you. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for you. So hello, Dr. Shadi. I think you're here. Let us know if you can hear us. I'll introduce you quickly, and you can share your screen and start. Hello. So we have Dr. Shadi is an associate professor at the computer science department at the American University of Beirut. And his research spans the multiple areas, including machine learning, information retrieval, and crowdsourcing. And he also worked on problems related to fairness and algorithmic decisions. So I hope now you will benefit from the algorithmic bias session, and the floor is yours, Dr. Shadi. You can share your screen and start.
Sounds great. Thank you very much for the introduction. I want to start by saying that I have a bit of a cough, so excuse me, for that. And also, if I'm lagging at any point or you can't hear me, please let me know, so I can switch networks. Okay.
Okay. Don't worry. Now I can hear you clearly. So
very good. That's great. So I guess screen. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes, I can see them.
Okay, all right. So that means we just, yeah.
Yes, but it's not full screen. Yeah, I can see a lot of slides.
Let me just stop sharing, go full screen. So I'm not also very familiar with Microsoft Teams, so
yeah, don't worry, we can fix it now.
That's okay. All right. Now I go back and share, and hopefully that should work. Screen. How about now?
Just loading. Yes, perfect.
Okay, great.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Please, if you have any questions, you can ask me as I'm presenting, or I can take the questions at the end, whatever you prefer. Okay, let's dig in. So I would like to start this talk by a small riddle. So let's say we have a father and his son, and they were in a car accident, and the father dies on the way to the hospital, but the boy was rushed into surgery. The boy is in a very bad condition, and a top surgeon is asked to perform the operation. Entering the room, however, the surgeon sees the boy and says, "I cannot operate, for that is my son." How is this possible, given that we already know that the father has died? Some possible or popular solutions to this riddle that that comes to mind immediately is maybe one of the fathers is a stepdad and the other is a biological dad. That the surgeon is the father's domestic partner. Maybe the mother had an affair. Maybe the surgeon is also a priest. So these could be some possible explanations of this riddle. Okay, now let's look at an alternative narrative. So let's assume we change the narrative a little bit. So it's a mother and her son that were in the car accident. Again, the mother dies and the child is rushed into surgery. And the surgeon enters the room and says, "I cannot operate, for that is my son." Now, how is this possible? There's not really much of a riddle here. The answer is straightforward. The surgeon is the boy's father. So really, if you look at this, just by changing the gender of the person, right, from father to mother, we're able to solve that riddle. And if you think now back about the first version, we could have really come up with the same, solution, that the surgeon could be the mother, right? So really, it's not necessary. We didn't say at all that the surgeon is a male. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that there are these gender stereotypes and that are embedded in our culture and embedded in our upbringing, and really when you think of a surgeon or a doctor, that's the first thing that comes to mind is that it's a male. Now, algorithms are also biased. So if you just do a Google image search on the keyword surgeon, I did that a few days ago, these are the results you get, and that's just a snippet of the results set. If you look at it, when you look at it, it's predominantly white people and males. So when you have an image of a single surgeon, it's typically a male, and you could investigate this on your own, and you'll see that most of the images that have a single surgeon is typically male. If you have females, they're usually in a group, and it's not even, and you cannot entirely tell if that's a surgeon or a nurse or not. And again, most of the people or most of the images would reflect that surgeons are white people. Now, this is actually after a lot of improvements from Google image search. So if you have done this a few years ago, it would have definitely been entirely dominated by men and white people. So they actually been working actively on trying to diversify like image search and other search services for these controversial terms or delicate terms. Another example, if you go to Google Translate, again, a few days ago, I did this mini experiment. I asked, to translate the sentence, the surgeon operated on the kid from English to Arabic, and the translation I get was قام الجراح بإجراء عملية على الطفل, and not الجراحة. So it's assumed immediately that a surgeon translates to male jarrah in Arabic. Okay, so we might think this is, so what's the big deal? I mean, yes, these are slightly annoying and disturbing examples, but they're not, something that we should worry too much about. And now I'm going to walk you through a series of incidents, and I'll scale up the level of severity and in terms of impact on our daily life, and show you that bias is everywhere in most of AI technology that we use today. So this is an incident from 2015. Google had an image tagging API, so you could upload an image and it would automatically tag that image with certain tags. So for example, this image would be automatically tagged as airplanes, this one cars, and so on. Now, someone tweeted, I assume these two people, one of them tweeted this image saying that the API, when they uploaded an image of themselves, it tagged them as gorillas. Yeah, and it seems right that it was failing when it comes to dark-skinned people or black people. So it was tagging them as gorillas or chimpanzees and so on. And that really caused a lot of talk in the technology world, and was really, reported by the Wall Street Journal, as you see here. And Google apologized for this incident, and they promised they would investigate it. And they spent maybe 2 to 3 years trying to fix this issue. And at the end, what they did was just remove the tag gorilla and chimpanzee from the API. So basically, the API would give it, any image would never output gorilla or tag. They couldn't solve the issue really, and so they did the workaround. Just verification, because I can't see the chat for some reason. So I just want to make sure that you can still hear me and everything's going well. Can somebody confirm?
Yes, I can hear clearly. There is some interaction when you ask some questions, but it's okay. We continued. Yeah. So don't worry. If you want, I'll monitor the chat and we'll let you know if you have any questions.
Sounds great. Sounds good. All right. So I'll move on. Now, another example is Twitter. So Twitter has an image cropping service. So if you upload, a long image or a big image, it usually crops this image because they want the timeline to be concise. They don't want, one tweet to take a very long space, and that's from, graphical user interface or user experience, motivation. So what happened is that CNN and other news media reported that actually Twitter image cropping API or service was racist or biased. And again, Twitter said promised they would investigate this, and they at the end just they stopped the whole process. This was, I mean, they ditched it like very recently, so last month, and before that they were investigating what's happening, and they promised they would, you know, let people know what's happening. Just to explain what is happening or why, you know, this is considered racist. This is a small experiment that was done by one of my students in the AI ethics course, so last year. This was still very new in the media, and so the image cropping service was still available on Twitter. So what he did is he did a small experiment, you know, this is just one example or one part of his experiment. And what I did, he would upload, you know, these images on Twitter as part of a tweet, and sees how the image cropping would work. So, you know, here in this example or in this experiment, we have 4 photos. They're all long, so the Twitter API would actually crop them because they're too long. And what happens is the result was that no matter what the image was, it was always cropped on to just show that white person. So it doesn't matter where that person was in the image. So if he wasn't, you know, in the second, in photo 2, you see him at the bottom. In photo 3, you see exactly the same image, but they were flipped. The black person is at the bottom and the white person at the top. Even if you have, you know, the image has many more black people than white people, it would still always crop the image, you know, so that it shows only the white person. And that's definitely racism. Okay, now we would think again, right? This is Twitter, bad and disturbing, but who cares? Now I'm gonna get into things that you know, are more severe or could affect people's life and a bigger extent. So, for instance, there is, you know, if you're looking at governmental services, they're now using a lot of AI and a lot of machine learning. One example is a UK passport service. So BCC investigated the service for the UK passport issuing. So you could issue a passport by just going to a website and uploading documents, including your picture, or renew your passport that way as well. And what they've noticed is that if you're a person with dark skin, usually the software would reject your picture and says that it's not, you know, according to standards. So, you know, no matter, people tried this, or at least in the investigation, they tried, you know, with different backgrounds, smiling, not smiling, making sure they really follow the standards as much as they can, and still the image would consistently be rejected. And, you know, the conclusion from this is that, you know, the service was again biased against particularly dark-skinned women. Facial recognition. So this is something that we use on a daily basis. So you use it on your phones to unlock your phone. You use it now in a lot of software companies. This is used as a way of getting into the company or outside the company, and, you know, a lot of places. This is really technology that is very heavily deployed, and since it started being deployed, people have realized it has a lot of issues again when it comes to race. So it was really failing a lot with dark-skinned people. So if you're you know, a black person, for instance, there is a very high chance that the face recognition system would not recognize you compared to white people. And a recent study by the US government actually confirms that, and they surveyed most of the face recognition systems out there, and they concluded that most of them actually do have you know, a bias issue when it comes to race. It's just, this is not just entirely when it comes to computer vision. So you know, things related to images and videos, it's everywhere. So also natural language processing. This is an example of such case. So Microsoft a few years ago launched an AI Twitter bot. Basically, that Twitter bot was trained on tweets. So they were collecting tweets and training this bot using these tweets, and then it would be on Twitter and it would chat with people. So retweet, reply to tweets, and so on. And it lasted only 1 day. So what happened is that bot in 1 day learned to become racist and sexist. So it started, cursing and throwing racial slurs and sexist tweets. And again, after 1 day, this was shut down. So the bot went down, and Microsoft apologized and stopped the tweet, the bot. Even more serious, online retail. So, when it comes to shopping and marketing, this is a study by the Wall Street Journal. So what happened is they concluded or observed that websites vary prices and deals based on users' information. And you might think this is not a big deal. So to give you an example, one particular company is Staple.com, which sells office supplies. And in that study or investigation, what they found out is that depending on where you are located, or where the company believes you are located, so basically your zip code, you get different prices for the same item. So I could be, in Hamra, and I'm seeing, the same item for a price that is different from someone in, let's say, Beqa or Shafia or something like this. And there was a justification for this by the company, is that they set the prices of items based on competition. So they look at your zip code, they look at, are there any other places that sell the same items in that location or that neighborhood? And if yes, they lower the prices, and no, they set the prices a bit higher, and that's a valid marketing strategy. And they claim there is no bias or favoritism here, because we're not using any protected attributes like gender or ethnicity to decide on prices. And that's true to an extent, except that there is a high correlation between your zip code and ethnicity, at least in certain countries. So, neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods tend to, be mostly like, the occupants of poor neighborhoods tend to be Black, for instance, in the States. And what happens is that, if you're a poor neighborhood, you have less competition for the company, so there would not be a lot of alternatives that sell the same items, and so you'll end up getting higher prices for items than what people in rich neighborhoods see. So really, the bias or the discrimination is indirect, in the sense that if you are Black, hence you live in a poor neighborhood, you will end up paying more for items than white people who will live usually in richer neighborhoods. Okay, and now even more serious, this is really one of the incidents that stirred the most controversy when it comes to algorithmic bias or discrimination in AI. So there is this software called Compass that is used by the justice system in the States. So it's actually used by real judges to decide on whether a person should get bail or be denied bail, and also how long the sentence should be. Yeah, so this is actually still currently being used, and ProPublica studied this. So they looked at this, and over a period of 2 years maybe, and they came up with the conclusion that this is highly biased, particularly with respect to race or ethnicity. And here, if we look at some examples to illustrate this, so you have on the top here, the Vernon Crater. Yeah, if you look at his, so of course the software decides on certain features, like I mean, you could look at really, I mean, it's a questionnaire that these convicts fill, and it decides on it gives a score for every person. If you're high risk, yeah, so if your score is high, close to 10, then you will end up being denied bail and taking a long sentence. So if you look at these two examples and you look at prior offenses, Vernon Prater was, had 2 armed robberies in the past, and then he was labeled by the software as low risk, so he got a score of 3, compared to Brisha Borden, had just juvenile misdemeanors, and she was labeled high risk. And you can guess that Vernon is white and Brisha is black. I mean, even the names, you could tell somehow that this is the case. And what they did in this study as well, ProPublica, which was great, is that they actually tracked these people after they went out of jail, after the campus software was used on them. And so if they had actually committed crimes again, so they tracked subsequent offenses. And for the first one, Vernon, which was low risk and probably either got bail or got a very low sentence, he actually went ahead and did another offense. Brisha, on the other hand, did not. And you could see this very systematically in the data set. So we studied this over a very large data set, and this seemed to be very systematic. So there's this systematic bias. So again, this guy is low risk, even though his profile should definitely be higher risk than Robert, was considered medium risk. And again, this was confirmed by looking at subsequent offenses. Okay, so now really this issue of bias is not just something that is philosophical, it can affect people's lives in a big way. Okay, this also happens in recruitment. So if you look, here some examples. So I have the Guardian in 2015 came up with a report that says that women are less likely to be shown ads for high-paid jobs on Google compared to men. So if I'm a man, I will get ads on Google and also on Facebook. I mean, there are other studies that confirm that this is the case on Facebook. I'll get like ads for highly paid jobs compared to women that might have the same qualification or even better qualifications. Reuters reported that Amazon stopped using a secret AI recruiting tool that they were using, and that's something that is no longer a secret. So Amazon was heavily using an AI tool to decide on recruitment, and it was systematically biased against women. Also, basically there's Harvard, a group from Harvard that worked on online ads as well, and they showed that this is very racist. So really black people or people with black names tend to get things related to drugs, ads related to how to improve your life without drugs, and how to get help with certain things, with crimes and stuff like this, compared to white people who get advertisements about great houses and great jobs and so on. Sharing economy is another example. So by sharing economy, I mean Uber and Airbnb. So on Airbnb, if you look at the Airbnb website, they actually are looking into this. So they formed a task force to look into this. So if you have a person that has a black sounding name, you have a higher chance of being rejected accommodation in Airbnb. And that was, again, verified through studies. And same thing in Uber. So people, Uber uses usually the ratings. So, for drivers to decide on whether they should, continue working for Uber or not. And there is a correlation between, there has been shown that there is a correlation between star rating and race. So people tend to provide higher ratings for white people than, for instance, Asians or black people. And I could go on forever. Maybe I could spend, the rest of the talk just giving you more examples, but I want, in fact, there are many books. There's actually full books that talk about this. Few of them are, Weapons of Math Destruction, Algorithms of Oppression, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And I encourage you, if you're interested in this, to read these books. These are very interesting books that, bring this up and also talk about how to deal with such issues of bias in, technology in general. I heard the beep. I'm not sure what it means, so I'll check the chat.
Yes, someone joined now.
Oh, okay. So it's good to continue?
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so you know, again, I hope that I've tried to convince you a little bit that this is a serious issue. Algorithmic bias is a serious issue, and you know, bias and discrimination in AI is something that we should not take lightly. And this is just a small history of you know, fairness research in machine learning, or what I refer to as AI ethics. So what happened is, as these studies started coming out and reports from, you know, big media outlets, the community was shaken a bit, the research community and the machine learning and artificial intelligence community, and they realized, okay, we have a serious problem. We need to slow down, and we need to start, you know, doing research to combat these issues and address them. And this is, you know, sort of a curve. I don't care about the numbers, so I don't even have the numbers here. And it stops here at 2017, but you could see the trend. It's actually exponential. It started very little, 2011. Hardly anybody was working in this area, so fairness in machine learning. And, you know, as years pass by, as more of these reports come out, more people get interested in working in this area, and the number of papers or publications that deal with fairness in machine learning has increased exponentially, and it will keep increasing as long as we don't find a solution for this. And this curve or this trend is not arbitrary or random. So if you look at it, in 2011, it was very little, and it has grown ever since, and that's for a reason. You know, until 2011, artificial intelligence and machine learning was really were really just research endeavors. So they were limited to just conferences and research in university or academia. And then starting from 2012, this is where deep learning, you know, became something that is, you know, very successful. People were successful in, you know, creating deep learning, and it turned AI and machine learning from research endeavor to actual deployed technology that is used in so many applications on a daily basis. And that's why, you know, people started realizing these issues with bias, and that's why, you know, we started seeing more research happening in this area. So it really correlates with taking AI from academia to industry. Yeah, that's really what motivated this increased interest in research related to fairness in AI. Okay, so if I were to think about what are the main research questions that these papers address, these are really boiled down to just two questions. How do I quantify bias given, you know, an AI system? How do I really measure whether it's biased or not, and how much it is biased? And biased with respect to whom? Really, that's the first question. And second question is, if it's biased, how do I address this bias? How do I mitigate this bias? How do I eliminate it or remove it? And I'll try to touch on both of these, you know, research questions or research areas in the rest of the talk. Okay. So why is this challenging, and why there are so many, you know, research papers on this? Is because we're not able to solve it until today. It's a very complex, you know, area. The main challenges are the following. There are so many notions of bias and fairness. If I ask you to define what fairness is or what bias is, and these, you know, go hand in hand with each other, we want to get rid of bias, we want to be fair, it's very difficult to pinpoint one particular definition that makes sense. It's very subjective, it's very task dependent. It's also, you know, what is fair might not be fair to you. What is fair in one context might not be fair in another context. And so there's so many definitions of fairness out there. So this is what is known as individual fairness, group fairness. There's, you know, when it comes to group fairness, there's disparate treatment, disparate impact, demographic parity, equalized odds, and so on. So that's one aspect, is that, you know, to quantify fairness, we need some measures or some metrics to say, you know, the system is biased by this amount. Similar to how do you measure the accuracy of a machine learning model? You have fixed metrics: F measure, precision, recall, accuracy, right? Unfortunately, when it comes to fairness or bias, you have so many metrics, and it's not clear which one you should use. The second issue is that there are so many sources of bias. So let's say you were able to figure out the right metric to quantify bias, and you want to address it now. There are various reasons your system could be biased. This could be, the data you're using to train your machine learning model is biased. Could be that the data where it's originally coming from is not biased, but as you were sampling this data, because you create training sets out of, like real world data, your sampling technique was biased. Could be that the machine learning algorithm itself is biased. So that's what I refer to by optimization bias. And of course, there are a lot more challenges. For instance, there is no incentive to work on this yet, apart from doing something good. So there's no regulations that enforce this. There are a lot more challenges that I'll go through as I go through these two particular aspects. Okay. So let's start. I'll look at the main definitions of fairness, that are most important, the one that are most heavily used in the research papers and in applications. So the first one is individual fairness, and it's really simple. Yeah, if you want to say I'm fair with respect to individuals, I can put it down or express it as the following. Individual fairness means that similar people should be treated similarly. Yeah. So let's assume I have a machine learning model, a classifier, let's say. I mean, that's the easiest example of an AI system. And that system works with people. So, it takes V, set of individuals, and assign them some outcomes. For example, my classifier could be, it takes credit card applicants and decides on how much should I give them as limit for their credit cards. I issue them a credit card and I give them a certain limit. Yeah. Now, individual fairness says the following: if two people are very similar in the feature space, so they have very similar features. So the distance, if I measure the distance between two individuals, X and Y, if you see in this blue oval, and they're close to each other, they should not have a very large distance in the outcome or the decision space. So they're, if I decide that X would get, $10,000 as a credit limit, then Y is not very far from it, in terms of feature space. And so it should get also something close to $10,000 as a credit limit. And the feature space would depend on some features, like, for instance, salary, that, how many years you're in residency, in your current house, some indicators that tell whether you'll be able to pay your credit card bill or not. Of course, it should not use protected attributes like race or gender, because that's against the law. And that's against the law in that particular application. If you're using this for credit card to decide on a job salary or whether somebody should get a job or not, you should not use one of these protected attributes. And we'll talk about this when we talk about group fairness. But in other scenarios or in other contexts, you might want to use protected attributes to as part of the feature space. So, for instance, if you're thinking of medicine, applying a machine learning model for medicine, it might matter whether you're male or female. Right? That might actually be part of your, of your features that guide your decision. And so that's why I'm saying, this is really context dependent. But the idea in general of individual fairness is that you have to define this distance metric in the feature space or in the observed space. It's called this as well, and then see if roughly these correlate or proportional to the distance in the outcome space. And if that's not the case, we have to have some threshold that tells you how proportional these are, and if it's not the case, then you're no longer fair with respect to individual fairness. Okay. Group fairness, on the other hand, says that all groups should be treated similarly. Yeah, so now it looks at people as groups rather than individuals. So groups are defined based on the value of one or more protected attributes. So what are protected attributes? These are gender, ethnicity, definitely disability or accessibility. So something that is relevant to the bootcamp, sexual orientation, religion, and so on. There's actually so many of them. Some are defined by law, again, some are context dependent. Now, Group fairness says that all groups, regardless of their protected attributes, should be treated similarly. So here's an example. Let's assume you have this data set, and we just have, for simplicity, just one protected attribute that is binary. Let's say gender. So blue dots here refer to males, and red dots refer to females. And let's say you built a binary classifier that says, take the applicant and decide whether they should get a credit card or their credit card application should be approved or not. So the favorable outcome is yes, accept the application, or provide a credit card, and the no is deny a credit card. Now, if we look at the predicted outcome on this data set, so you have a single female, the red is the protected group, the females. You have a single female that got a credit card approval compared to 3 males, and that's the distribution for the denial or the no outcome. And the question is, you built this classifier and you want to answer this question: is this output fair? Yeah. Now, fair with respect to group fairness, right? So really, is it group fair? And we'll see different metrics of how to do this, or how to quantify this. So the first, 2 metrics are really straightforward. So these have come from social science or law. Yeah, so these are really something that you find in law, and we borrowed it from law. So the first one is called disparate treatment, and that's the legal practice of treating a person differently based on a protected attribute. So if I, built my classifier in this slide, and my decision here, the feature space included gender or sexual orientation or age, that is illegal. Yeah, the person can go and sue you and win the case, at least in the US, right? This is prohibited by law. There's a lot of applications where this is prohibited, and depending again on the law of the country, this is applied. Anyway, right? So disparate treatment means you're actually using the protected attributes to build your classifier or AI system. So decisions are based explicitly on protected attributes. And that's illegal in most cases, and easy to fix, right? Easy to fix because you should just remove these from the feature space. You should not include any protected attributes in your application or in system, unless, of course, it's justified. So you have to do affirmative action or positive discrimination, like in medicine, for instance. Now, the second one, disparate impact, that's the most popular measure when it comes to group fairness. And it says the output or the outcome does depend on the protected attributes, like gender or race, etc., even if it were not explicitly used in your classifier, your AI system. So how is that? The problem is some non-protected attributes might be proxies to protected ones. So let's say I'm building the classifier for the credit card approval or denial, and I'm using zip code. Zip code is not one of the protected attributes, but it correlates with ethnicity. Remember the staple.com example. So if I, zip code tells me whether you're black or white. Even though, right, I'm not using your ethnicity, I'm still, inferring this implicitly through your zip code, and that's is considered disparate impact. Yeah. So this is really usually is unintentional. People do not realize this, and so that's really why it's the most popular metric. So let's define this concretely, because I think if you're gonna build a model for your like whatever you're doing in this bootcamp, I encourage you to look at these things, to consider these things. These are very important. So we'll try to define this metric a little bit. So let's assume, just for simplicity, I have one protected attribute that is binary, so either male or female. Let's say the privileged group, the males, is S equal to 1, so I'll refer to it as blue. And the protected group or the unprivileged group is S not equal to 1. I refer to it as red. And also we'll assume, for simplicity, a binary classifier. So the outcome is either 1 or not 1. one is desired, so approve credit card application, and not one is undesired, to not approve credit card application. Now, disparate impact measure, really, all you have to do is see is the outcome for both groups, the protected and unprotected, similar. Yeah, so really distribution of the outcome, favorable outcome, is similar across groups, and that would mean that you've treated all groups similarly. So, in other words, all I have to do is measure the probability of outputting or predicting one, the favorable outcome, given that I'm from the protected group, divided by the probability of predicting one, given that I'm from the privileged group. And if that ratio is greater than or equal to some value, 1 minus epsilon, where epsilon is just a threshold, that says, you know, you're fair. Yeah, I consider you a fair system or classifier. And you know, this relates to, again, something in law called the disparate impact law. So in the US, the epsilon is typically 0.2, and there is a rule that says, yeah, you know, you have to have this ratio be greater than or equal to 80%. So if it's less than 80%, that's again illegal. Yeah, so if you're hiring for a job or something like this, you typically you have to measure disparate impact and make sure that this is the case. This 80% rule is applied. Okay. Now let's look at our example again. So here is our data set from before. Blue is males, red are females, and favorable outcome is yes. Yeah. So if I compute the probability of yes given the you know, the like the privileged group, the blue, the males, it's going to be 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 10. We have 10 blue or 10 males in the data set. So that's really the probability of yes given blue. And if you measure the probability of red given yes given red, that's 2 out of 5. Okay, and now if I compute the ratio between these two to measure disparate impact, I get that it's equal to 1, because, you know, 2 over 5 and over 4 over 10. 4 over 10 is actually 2 over 5 as well. And so it's, you know, 100%. That means the system, according to disparate impact, is absolutely fair. Okay, now demographic parity is quite similar. The only difference is, you know, you do the absolute the difference rather than the ratio. So you measure again the probability of the y equal to 1 given the privileged group minus probability of y equal 1 or the outcome equal to 1 given the protected group. And if that difference is small, you know, the smaller it is, the better or the more fair the system is. Yeah, so just a very related measure to disparate impact. Okay, so these are, you know, two very popular measures. The issue with these two measures is that they really can punish a perfect classifier, in the sense, you know, a classifier that doesn't make any mistakes. Yeah, so, you know, 100% accuracy, this classifier might still be considered unfair. So one of the very popular measures that could be used in that case is called the equalized odds. So this, you know, was, you know, you could use this on the campus data set, for instance, the one which decides on risk assessment. So equalized odds deals with error rates rather than whether, you know, what is the distribution of the outcomes. So really what it does, it says it has two conditions that, you know, it measures the probability of the favorable outcome given the privileged group and, you know, the label being 0. So basically it measures the false positive rate, the error rate, you know, you make on the favorable, the privileged group compared to the protected group. How much error you make, right? That your prediction is 1 and the actual label was 0, right? In both cases. And so we're measuring the difference between this. And the smaller this value is, means that you make mistakes or errors for the protected group and the unprotected group in a similar fashion, right? So you're not favoring, you're not making more mistakes on the protected group. And And that's what happened in the campus data set. You're making a lot more mistakes on the protected group, the Black people, than the white people. Yeah. And vice versa, right? So we're doing the good mistakes, we're doing it more for the white people, and the bad mistakes, we're doing it more for the Black people. The same thing here. So this is the true positive rate. You measure the difference between the true positive rate for the privileged group and the protected group. Yeah. So here, my prediction is 1, and the actual label is also 1. If that difference is very small, that means your system is fair with respect to equalized odds. And you really, if you want to satisfy equalized odds fairness, you have to satisfy both of these conditions. And the epsilon again is something that you set based on the application. So it might be 0.2, it might be 0.1, might be very small if you want to be very fair. So it really depends on the application. All is good. Can you confirm that you're still there?
Yes, we're here.
Okay. How much time do I have left?
10 minutes.
Okay, wonderful.
Would this be good?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
Okay, so what are the limitations with these metrics? So I haven't covered, I have covered just a sample of these metrics, the most popular or most important ones. That most of these metrics, unfortunately, until today, 2021, assume binary classification. So the majority of the work you will see, they say, okay, we're dealing with fairness and AI and machine learning, and then we'll assume you have a binary classifier. So classifier that outputs yes or no, because these metrics are designed for that, right? So now there's also a lot of work trying to extend these metrics to other tasks, like multi-class classification. If you have, multiple classes, multi-label classification. You have recommender systems, we're predicting ratings, of people in Uber or something like this, or in crowdsourcing platform, and ranking. So it's not even classification at all, or even in unsupervised learning, like clustering, anomaly detection, and so on. So there is a lot of work on how do I extend these metrics. There's also another issue, which is that these metrics usually assume a single binary protected attribute. Yeah, so you have a privileged group and protected group, and there's a lot of work now to extend this to multi-valued attributes and multiple of them. So you could have, ethnicity is not just white and not white, or black and not black. It's actually black, white, Asian, Middle Eastern, and so on, or North African, and so on. Like there's so many levels of ethnicity. There's actually, you could look at this in not only just the privileged group is not just males versus females. It could be males versus females, and at the same time blacks versus Asians, and combinations of those. Yeah. A lot of these metrics assume or work assuming that the protected group are given, right? So I know exactly what is the protected group, who I'm discriminating against, my system is discriminating against, and that's really not the case usually. I have a system, I build a system, and I deploy it, and I don't know exactly who I might be harming or biased against, right? So I really typically want to discover this, basically discover these protected groups based on combinations of protected attributes as I go. So in a data-driven fashion, and that's a combinatorial problem, because you could try, all possible, protected attribute, but sometimes it's the combinations of these attributes. So this is really can be very computationally expensive. Now, another thing is multi-stakeholder fairness. So typically, you look at this from the consumer side, so the patients, the credit card applicants, but sometimes it's also important to look at this from in a multi-stakeholder fashion. So really, are you fair to the consumer, but are you also fair to the producer? There's, again, a line of research that is going into this direction, what is known as multi-stakeholder fairness. Now, last thing and last limitation and challenge is that it has been proven that it's impossible to achieve different notions of fairness simultaneously. So, as an example, you cannot. There's few papers that prove that you cannot achieve individual and group fairness at the same time. So, if you guarantee group fairness based on disparate impact, for instance, you might actually not be able to achieve individual fairness, and vice versa. And even, when it comes to disparate impact versus equalized odds, as an example, again, you might not be able to achieve these at the same time. So it's either or. And it's not clear which one should I choose for my application, which one is more important. That's what makes it quite challenging. So I tell you, you build a system, which metric should I, decide whether the system is fair with respect to? That's a very difficult question to answer sometimes. Okay, so here's a recipe. I think this is the most important slide for me when it comes to you. So really, here's a recipe for mitigating algorithmic bias. So you really need to design your models with complete goals for fairness and inclusion. So every time you're training a machine learning model, you're building an AI system, you really need to think about this. Is it fair? Is it inclusive or not, right? And to answer this question, because we're, particularly if you come from a technical background, this is something that we overlook unintentionally. You need to engage with social scientists and other relevant experts. If you're working in the domain of medicine, you really need to engage with doctors and, with people in public health and understand what is the implication of your system. And you need together with them to define fairness criteria. What makes the system fair and what makes it unfair? Once you build the system, you need to check it for undesired biases. So, you need to include diverse testers. You cannot just test the system yourself or test it only by white people, only by guys. Or, you need to really create a diverse team of testers. Similar to how you test code, but now you really need to look at the demographics of your testers. That's something important because, again, it's subjective. And, for me as a maybe a male, something might seem fair that does not might not appear to be fair for females. So you really need to have a diverse team of testers, and you need to do stress testing. So subject it to extreme cases and see whether it passes your fairness criteria that you've defined earlier or not. And of course, this has to be a feedback loop, right? So if it's failing some tests, you have to go back and refine your approach. You need to analyze the performance now that you've tested it and you think it's actually quite fair. You need to deploy it and test it, right, on real people and real world scenarios and adjust or refine your model based on, deployment in the real world. Because no matter what test cases you use, they still might be biased or still might be a small proportion of what actually happens in the outside world. And it's important to use, of course, representative data sets to train and test your models. So make sure that your data set are representative of your population, they're not biased towards a certain subpopulation and so on. So fairness, I'll talk about the last point, particularly because that's usually very crucial. If you have garbage in, you'll get garbage out. If your data is biased, you will not get a fair model for sure. So you need to address few aspects of bias when it comes to data collection when you're creating your training sets. You need to address population bias, meaning you target underrepresented groups. So if your population is biased, let's say you're doing an application for accessibility and the data of the users, right, for your website is mostly people without accessibility issues, then you need to really target your, getting data for people with accessibility issues because you want to represent this underrepresented group. It might be that your population is not biased, but the way you're generating data, training data is biased, so sampling bias in the sense that you're collecting data that is actually not representative of all groups, particularly the minority groups. So you might want to oversample from minority groups, let's say, from females or from Black people to represent them equally in your training data set, even if basically your population is biased or not. Because otherwise, some groups would be treated as outliers by the machine learning model because these are optimization algorithms at the end, right? They optimize for accuracy. And so sometimes if you have very small training examples from a minority group, it's okay to do errors on them, right? Because, the majority class usually wins. So that's something that we do in general in machine learning. We always want to make sure that the classes are balanced or data is balanced. But here we're talking about balance with respect to demographics, and that's not the labels. Hope this is clear. You should also do data augmentation, again, not in the sense of improving efficiency or accuracy of the model, but more to improve on representation. So if your data, you might synthesize data or create data for minority groups. Let's say your data set, you're training a chatbot, and your data set, is a web corpus or web collection, and all the documents, or the majority of the documents, it says he is a doctor, right? So the chatbot will learn that doctor is typically associated with males, and so you might want to actually inject, right, chase a doctor arbitrarily in the documents, so that it learns that actually doctors could be both males and females. Yeah, just to give you an example of what I mean by data augmentation. And of course, right, you need to have a fairness-aware online learning or active learning. So online learning means you look at the errors the machine learning model is doing, and you collect more data to improve on its performance. And you need to do this with a gender lens or with fairness lens. So you really collect more data for the demographic groups that you're failing the most on, so the ones with the highest error rates. Okay, just quickly, I will show you, okay, now we've got the data, you think you have a good representative data set, and you want to take it to train the machine learning model. You can also do some bias mitigation at the machine learning, stage, right? So as you're training your machine learning model. So typically, this is what we have, right? We have a set of features and labels. The group is here just so that I know that I'm aware that I need to do some fairness or take care of some fairness, right? But typically, a machine learning model works by minimizing some loss. The loss is measured based on the actual label of an instance and the predicted label. And now what you need to do is you need to see, the distribution. So if I'm using, let's say, disparate impact as a measure of fairness here, then I want to see the distribution of the favorable outcome, across the groups. So the blue is the privileged group, and the red is the underprivileged group. And if there is a difference in the distribution, that tells me this model is not fair with respect to disparate impact. How would I fix that? You include the fairness objective in the loss function. So instead of minimizing the loss with respect to just accuracy or prediction error, you want to also include that you have fairness, right? So you want to minimize the correlation between the prediction and the group. So in the sense that if you're predicting the unfavorable outcome, it should not differ whether you're male or female, right? So really it should be oblivious to the what group or what demographics you belong to. So almost if you look at the distribution of the the blue group and the red group when it comes to the favorable outcome, it should be almost the same. And how do you do this? It's similar to regularization. If you know regularization in machine learning, you increase the loss a little bit, you sacrifice a bit of the accuracy for the sake of generalization. Here we sacrifice a bit of the accuracy for the sake of fairness. Finally, right, you could also, a lot of work deals with this as constraint optimization. So you train your machine learning model subject to constraints. In other words, you want to ensure that fairness criteria are satisfied, whether this is disparate impact, equalized odds, it doesn't matter. And how you do this? You express these as constraints, and you train the machine learning model not to minimize the loss or maximize accuracy, but actually a constraint optimization problem. Minimize the loss subject to my fairness criteria or fairness constraint. So for example, this could be one constraint. And now I solve, minimize the, mean squared error subject to this constraint, right? So now the weights will have to be adjusted not only based on minimizing the loss, mean squared error, cross entropy error, but actually such that this is guaranteed, this constraint is satisfied. And you could replace this constraint with any other constraint based on any metric that makes sense to your application. Yeah. So basically the learning algorithm minimizes the loss subject to the constraint. Okay, so really what I want to say, to wrap this up is that you should really think about fairness and bias whenever you're training a machine learning model, you're building an AI system, and that, should come become a priority in all stages of the machine learning pipeline. So it's at the design where you have to think who this might harm, who this might be biased against, and you have to engage in conversations with a diverse team. When it comes to data, when you're constructing training set, you have to make sure that it's representative, it's not biased. When you're training the machine learning model, you have to, maybe embed these fairness constraints or add it to the, objective of the optimization to make sure that you're actually training a fairness-aware machine learning model. And then when you deploy the system, you have to keep monitoring it and, refine it or, get feedback as you test it on real people in real world scenarios. All right, so if you're intrigued by any of this at all, I encourage you to take the AI ethics course. It's a course co-taught by Dr. Hans Müller from the philosophy department. It's a general education course, considered humanities. Assumes no background, technical background, I mean, and it covers much more than bias. So algorithmic bias is definitely one of the topics, but we also talk about autonomy and liability, ownership, control and access, governance, explainability, accountability, labor, automation, and regulation, among other topics as well. All right, thank you. I hope I was on time. Yeah, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Sure.
Thank you, everyone. And I think we had one question and we didn't cover it in the middle. I'm not sure if now it makes sense or you need us to go over it. Okay, we have another one from the same person. Do privacy and data governance, technical robustness and safety should also be the part of machine learning to avoid bias? Better ethical framework can solve this problem. So maybe I'll read it again. Do privacy and data, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I got the gist of the question, but maybe you can repeat it later. But yes, definitely privacy is something that is quite important, and it's a core focus when it comes to AI ethics. I focused on parts of the AI ethics, which is bias, but definitely privacy is an issue. And if we cover a lot of these topics in the AI ethics course, and you could see it also in if you're engaged in any of the AI ethics readings or books or something like this, you will definitely see a lot on privacy. I don't remember the rest of the question, or I haven't got the rest of the question. So if I missed something, please, let me know.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone wants to unmute and ask question, please do. We can take maybe 5 more minutes. Otherwise, we're done, and you can also ask questions on the Teams channel, and we're here to support, even if it's tomorrow. Okay. I think no one has any other questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Shadi. It was a really nice presentation. And of course, you can take some ideas and work on them in your project. And if you have maybe a follow-up question regarding specifically maybe the solution that you're into, please ask specific questions on Teams, and we're here to support, because each solution has their own biases and ethical constraints. So, okay. Thank you so much. We can wrap it up. And tomorrow the sessions will start at 2 p.m. Lebanon time. Please join on time. We have also some interesting sessions that will help you. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much, Dr. Shadi. It was a really nice presentation.
Sure. And good luck, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.